Hello curious people, today I am here to help you. I know you are using this video to help you fall asleep. So before you like this video and subscribe to the channel, tell me where you are from and what time you are watching. Make yourself comfortable now. I stepped into the stories. I live in a small rural town that was nestled away from the hustle and bustle of city life, in an area not that far from Richmond, Virginia. It's the kind of town that would take about 20 minutes to drive from one end to the other. There's this main road that cuts straight down the center of town, and everything is situated alongside or branching off from it. My house sat on a hill, just in front of a thick patch of trees which separated my house from the next street. The next street over in that particular direction was a little over half a mile, but as a kid it felt as big as the Amazon. I loved playing in the woods, and the sound of the leaves crunching underfoot as I ran from imaginary monsters or towards a castle in the trees. Those were good, simpler times. I'm an only child, and I never really made any friends in school. Quite the opposite, actually. I was bullied the entire time I was in school, until it happened. For the meantime, however, I found my solace using my imagination to take me on grand adventures under the shady canopy. One of the things that always interested me were the many different spiders that could be found living within these woods, all of various shapes and sizes, some harmless and others pretty lethal. They would adorn the trees like eight-legged ornaments. I would imagine I were a secret agent on a dangerous mission, dodging the almost invisible webs as if they were laser beams and could slice off an arm like butter. I've never been afraid of spiders, but I have always felt pity for them. As soon as any person sees one of them, their immediate reaction is to kill it. And that's a terrible way to live for any creature, spider and human alike. Because of this, if I would ever spot a spider inside my house or somewhere that was potentially dangerous for them, I'd always try to gently pick it up and take it to safety. I'd use a piece of cardboard or a stick and usher the little guy on, then carry them outside or to the grass or something and let them walk off. If I found one that I thought was especially interesting, like one with bright colors or abnormally long legs, I'd take it to the biggest tree in the woods and place it on a branch. Now it might sound silly to you, but I'd also talk to them, too. They wouldn't talk back, obviously. I didn't think I was having real conversations with them or anything like that. I'd speak to them like you'd speak to your pet. I would always say hello whenever I saw them, and I'd apologize if I ever disturbed one of their meticulously crafted webs. I saw the spiders, and all creatures really, as equals to people. After all, we are, every one of us here on Earth, just trying to survive. My father, however, did not share my optimistic disposition. My father was, well, let's just say he was never going to win a Father of the Year award. My mother, God rest her soul, died giving birth to me, and I've always felt like he blamed me for it. From the stories my neighbors and aunt have told me, she was the sweetest person they'd ever met, and way too good for someone like my father. Shortly after my mom's passing, my Aunt Rose stayed with us for the first 5 years of my life or so, and things were about as good as they could. When I saw him reach over for the bottle, I acted without hesitation. I bolted past him and ran for the door, not looking back at the man I called my father. I heard his angry shouts as he finished the remaining alcohol, just as I reached the door and turned the knob. The door flew open, and I dashed through it, heading into the woods. My heart raced, and my vision was blurry from the tears, but I knew that if my dad caught me, I was in serious trouble. I heard him yelling from the house, but I didn't look back. I kept going, my mind racing, but my feet moving on their own, carrying me toward the safety of the trees. I had run through these woods so many times before, I could probably find my way blindfolded. I reached the large tree and stopped, my lungs burning from the effort. I leaned against the tree, catching my breath, still listening for my father, but in my panic, I thought I might have lost him. I turned slowly, sticking my head around the edge of the trunk, just as something large and strange appeared. I froze in place, my heart racing even faster. There, standing in front of me, was an enormous spider, its legs thick as tree trunks, its mandibles long and sharp. It lunged forward and quickly subdued my father, who had followed me into the woods. The spider's movements were quick and precise, leaving my father helpless on the ground. As the creature hovered over him, it turned its many eyes toward me, its voice resonating in my mind. "Do not be afraid, young one. We mean you no harm," the voice echoed, calm and soothing despite the chaos around it. "He, however, will not fare as well." The spider's gaze shifted to my father, who was now still and unresponsive, his eyes wide and filled with fear. "Do you remember me, little one? It has been many nights since then. You brought me here, to this tree. For years, your kind have been hostile toward us, yet you have shown kindness. That is why we watch over you." I stared at the spider, too stunned to speak, as its words filled my thoughts. The creature continued, "Ever since that night, I have watched you. The woods are full of those you've helped, and now you are not alone." My father, still conscious but paralyzed, gurgled a few words, unable to speak clearly, his expression twisted in confusion and fear. I looked at the spider, still unsure of what to make of the situation. "Is he going to be okay?" I asked, my voice trembling. The spider's voice echoed again, its tone still calm. "Not for a while. He will remain like this, unable to move, and he will know the passing of time until the end." "Does this trouble you?" I hesitated, thinking deeply before shaking my head. "Wait, the spider that bit him in my house, was it you?" When I saw him reach over for the bottle, I acted without further hesitation. I bolted past him and ran for the door, not bothering to look back at the man I called my father. I heard his angry grunts as he downed the remaining alcohol just as I reached the door and turned the knob. The door flew open, and I shot out of it like a bullet, heading into the woods. My heart beat like a drum, and my vision was blurry from the tears. But I knew that if my dad caught me, he would probably actually kill me. I heard him shouting from the house, but I didn't look back. I pushed on. My mind was still back in the house, but my feet were on autopilot, carrying me towards the safety of the trees. I had run through these woods so many times before. I could probably run blindfolded and not hit a single tree. I reached the big one and stopped, my lungs burning with relentless intensity. I sat down and propped myself up against the tree, panting heavily and sweating. I tried to steady my breathing while still listening out for my father, but in my panic I thought I must have lost him. I turned slowly and stuck my head around the edge of the trunk, just as a size 12 steel toe boot was launched into my face, the force knocking me backwards. I screamed in agony as pain exploded throughout my head, blood already beginning to pour from my freshly broken nose. "You're gonna regret running away, boy. You took my wife from me, the light of my life. You sucked all the life out of her like the mosquito you are, and you took my angel from me. My life has been hell ever since, and all you ever do is disobey me and make excuses. So, since you love these damn woods so much, I might as well bury you here and fix all my problems." My father snarled at me. I shut my eyes and tensed my body, preparing for the inevitable strike that would end my life, but it never came. Instead, I heard the loud thud of something massive hitting the ground. I opened my eyes when I heard the blood-curdling scream of my father to see an ungodly sight. There, standing impossibly in front of me, was an enormous spider, with legs as thick as telephone poles and mandibles as long as my arm. It lunged at my father and bit down on his shoulder, leaving 2 huge holes when it pulled away. The wounds instantly darkened, and my father's blood began to bubble around the edges of the holes. His body stiffened, and he screamed again, falling over to the ground. I sat paralyzed with fear, my heart feeling like it would explode at any second. My father's body, however, was paralyzed by other means, for he remained stiff while continuing to scream and plead for help. The monster then turned its eyes to me, blinking a few of them. "Do not be afraid, young one," a voice spoke into mine. The spider's huge mandibles produced chittering and clicking sounds as the words entered my head. and I knew it was speaking to me. We do not mean you any harm, little one. He, however, will not be so lucky. The beast clicked, rolling my father's body underneath its massive body. As it began to cocoon my still wailing dad, it spoke again. Do you remember me, little one? It has been many nights since then. I was the first you brought here, to this tree. For countless decades your kind have been hostile to us, ending our lives beneath their heels or swatting us with newspapers. It is why we birth so many young, for most of them shall never get the chance to live a full life. You, however, are different. It then finished the cocoon, and the words continued in my brain. Ever since you brought me here, I have grown, and I have watched you. Since then, you have continued to show kindness to many of us. These woods are filled with those who have benefited from your selfless actions. My father then made a gurgling noise as he tried to choke out my name. It seemed the toxin was spreading all over, for when I looked into his eyes, they were a dark shade of purple. No irises to speak of. He tried to talk, but it sounded like his throat was closing up because he produced a wheezing sound. I looked back to the spider and asked, is he going to die? The monster chittered its response. Not for another few hours, no. He will stay paralyzed until it is over, however, and he will feel everything until the end. Does this upset you? I paused for a minute and shook my head, then asked another question. So wait, that spider that bit him in my house, is that how you watched me? Another few gurgling and coughing sounds came from my father before the spider replied, clicking its wet mandibles together. Of course, as I said, these woods are filled with those who owe you their lives. He was to alert us if ever things got too bad, but he chose to give his life to help you of his own accord. Before he died, he released a pheromone which alerted us to danger, and that is when I knew something was wrong. Many more of my kind would gladly do the same. It's because of you that most of us are here. A small feeling of pride welled up inside me, and for once in a long time, I felt love. My good feelings were gone an instant later when once again my father choked on words which would not form. I walked over and crouched down so my face was close to his, studying all the dark veins under his skin. What was that? Was all I said. After about half a minute of gags and gurgles, he finally said, I'm sorry, sir. Please, help me. I looked into his dark, sick eyes, stood up and said, are you about to give me lip, boy? You know the rules. Pick a switch. Better hurry up, or I'll decide for you. His eyes grew wide as a moment of clarifying silence hung in the air. Slowly, I backed away from him and looked over to the monstrous spider, and gave him a nod of confirmation. The beast shrieked in delight while dozens of spiders descended down from branches and slowly covered my still choking father, beginning to wrap around his coffin made of web. Within minutes, he was completely secured in webbing, and I stood there, patiently waiting until his muffled groans fell silent. A vicious smile crept its way across my face as I watched the hundreds of strands descend upon him, lifting him slowly into the trees as if he were being raptured. A sudden relief washed over me, and my eyes began to water while I looked upon the denizens of the trees. Thank you. Thank you all. I said to my unlikely saviors, these supposed pests abhorred by society, and I turned away to head back up to my now empty house. The chittering and scurrying of millions of tiny legs following me brought an almost alien emotion back into my life. Joy. I didn't write this as some sort of confession or form of atonement in any way. Oh no. This is a testament to the tenacity of life, the will to survive. My father was a real piece of shit, and even now after 3 long years without him, I do not regret what happened. In fact, I revel in knowing that he isn't around to spread his hateful nature anymore, because with his life taken, mine could finally start. Shortly after this, I began going to school again, because even I knew that if I went missing from school, cops would be involved. So I kept my head down for the most part, but never again did I allow myself to be bullied. It's funny how one small little creature can make someone sick for days, or leave burning welts all over your skin, or even kill you. Word spread quickly amongst the delinquents about weird shit seeming to happen with anyone who fucked with me, and eventually they left me alone. Everyone left me alone. My only friends now are the eight-legged inhabitants of the woods, and I very much prefer it that way. Let this serve as a warning to those of you who treat others as lesser life forms than yourself. All life has value, no matter how small. I'm breaking so many of my own rules by posting this account on an online forum and under an alias. In my long, and dare I say it, distinguished career as a freelance investigative journalist, I have never taken such an action. Nor have I ever published a story without first checking and double-checking my information. In actual fact, I only have one source for the majority of the stories I plan to recount. One man who was branded a maverick and lunatic by the authorities. The people in power who were so eager to silence him. Spooky narrative audiobooks. I'll confess that I was very cynical when I first heard the old seaman's outlandish tales. I've never been a believer in the supernatural world and have based all my beliefs in hard scientific fact. But recent events have changed my mind, and my source is a man I've grown to trust. Advertisements. Even so, I wish I had the opportunity to further investigate the claims made and obtain conclusive evidence. But alas, I fear my time is limited. The government may come after me. Certainly, they have the incentive to silence me. Still, during my career I've faced down many petty bureaucrats, secret policemen, and tin pot dictators. Governments don't scare me anymore, but what lies beneath the deep blue sea certainly does. I'm sure you're all familiar with thalassophobia. That is, the persistent and intense fear of deep bodies of water. This was never a phobia that affected me to any great degree. In times past, my rational mind would have written such fears off as an evolutionary response, or a result of watching so many killer shark movies. I never would have dreamt that our oceans were home to so many dark secrets and evils almost beyond human comprehension. Some say ignorance is bliss, but this was never a philosophy I adhered to. In fact, I have always prided myself on my thirst for knowledge and passion to pursue the truth. That's why I became a journalist after all. But given what I've learned, and the sheer terror which has now invaded my conscious mind, I'm left to wonder whether it's all been worth it. But I can't turn back the clock or erase this knowledge from my memory. Nor can I escape the dark power which has its icy grip upon me. In the end, I feel compelled to write and tell this story, even if it's the last thing I do in this world. What can I say about Jack Brady, my fearless source, and a legend of the oceanic community who risked everything to tell me the truth? Jack was in his early 70s by the time I made his acquaintance. A man with a full life's experience behind him, but still filled with a steely determination and defiance, visible even under his world-weary eyes and wrinkled skin. It's hard to believe that it's only been a month since old Jack first contacted me by email to request a meeting. Jack hinted that he had a story of great importance which he wished to impart to me, and only me. Apparently, he read some of my previous exposes and felt I was the right man for the job. Advertisements. I'll confess that I almost dismissed and deleted the unsolicited email I had. I receive a lot of hoax and prank messages given my career, and Jack's vague descriptions of the secrets of the 7 seas frankly sounded like a lot of BS. But I didn't delete the email and instead sent a reply to arrange a meeting. I can't say why exactly. Call it a journalist's instinct, but I got a whiff of the story and had to follow the lead. I didn't walk into the meeting blind, however. As always, I did my due diligence and looked into Jack before going to meet him. I soon discovered that my source had lived an interesting life and varied career, although his passion for the sea was a constant. Born and raised in an Irish Catholic family in Boston, Jack had left home to join the Navy at 18 and spent the next 5 years in the service. After his honorable discharge, our hero worked as a diver in the West Indies for several years before an unspecified incident made him suddenly quit and seek a new career. His employment history was rather vague after this point, at least according to the official record. He was formerly employed by the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration for nearly 4 decades, although I noted how Jack was officially listed as an independent contractor on their roster. It was unclear what work Jack Brady did for this seemingly mundane and unremarkable government agency, but his email strongly implied the NOAA was a part of a wider conspiracy. But what were they covering up? Jack's initial email didn't provide the details, but he did send a number of hyperlinks leading to obscure and seemingly unrelated articles. I read the collection of news stories, scientific journals, and Wikipedia articles, which covered everything from biblical sea monsters to the lost city of Atlantis and unexplained underwater sounds. I could only see one thing which linked these stories together, and that was Jack Brady's lifelong passion, the 7 Seas. We met in a spit and sawdust bar in the Harbor District, the type of place where the patrons glared at you suspiciously when you entered. I found Jack sitting at the bar nursing a large glass of whiskey. His appearance was much as I would have expected. Jack was a large man, not overweight but well-built. I noted an old scar across his right cheek and how his deep blue eyes were focused despite the alcohol he'd already consumed. Jack greeted me coolly, shaking my hand firmly and nodding his head. He offered me a drink, which I politely declined, and motioned me over to a corner booth where he said we could talk in private. For whatever reason, Jack refused to let me record our conversation, and so I did my best to transcribe his words in shorthand. I started by asking him questions about his upbringing and early career, just to get a feel for the old-timer. His answers were short and to the point. He'd grown up in a seafaring family and was taught to sail at an early age. Jack said little about his time spent in the Navy, only saying that he'd served as an enlisted sailor on a destroyer and was deployed to the South China Sea during the fall of Sabin. It was clear that he didn't wish to talk about his personal and family life, but he was keen to recount a story from his time working as a rescue diver in the Bahamas. The 13th of July, 1982. I'll never forget the date. I know it's a cliche, but that was the day which changed my life forever. I got a call that morning from the Nassau police asking for my help with a body recovery offshore. A fisherman had reported seeing a corpse standing upright in the shallow waters. Standing upright. I interjected in confusion. Yeah, Jack replied. His feet were encased in concrete. Real mafia shit. Sleeping with the fishes, you know. I raised my eyebrow in surprise. Wow, that's unusual. No, not really. Jack responded with a simple shrug of his shoulders before he took another swig of whiskey. At the time, we were right in the middle of the busiest drug smuggling route in the Western Hemisphere. Drug runners have disputes and corpses end up in the water. Body recoveries were pretty common. The circumstances were strange, but it was only once I got into the water that I realized something wasn't right. How so? I asked, my interest now piqued. Well, it was a hot day. Temperatures in the high 90s. The water should have been warm. But when I made the dive, it was ice cold. I remember shivering once I reached the surface. It made no sense, but things only got weirder from that point. He paused again to take another gulp of hard liquor. I guess Jack needed the Dutch courage to continue, and I noticed how the color had drained from his face. The body wasn't deep, only 20 to 30 meters down. We weren't far from the shore, and the water was crystal clear, and so I could see the body from the surface. So despite the warning signs, I made the dive. Like I said, the water was impossibly cold, but there was something else. There were no fish anywhere in the vicinity. Now, I've dealt with a lot of body recoveries, and when a corpse is underwater for any length of time, it's going to attract scavengers. The bottom feeders come first, and the bigger predators follow once they smell blood in the water. Nature takes its course, and before long nothing's left but bone and cartilage. But on this dive, there wasn't a living thing to be seen. I was puzzled by the direction the story was going, but also intrigued. I noticed how Jack's voice had lowered in volume, and he appeared reluctant to continue his account, so I had to prompt him. Go on, I whispered. Jack broke eye contact, staring down at his glass before continuing. Like I said, I made the dive and saw the body close up. I already told you about his feet being encased in concrete. I don't know who did that to him, but I guess they had their reasons. The body was male and about 6 foot in height, but that's about all I could tell about the victim. His clothes were ripped and torn, and his flesh was rotting. There was no evidence that any animals had feasted upon him, but nevertheless, the man's body was falling apart. The decomposition was advanced, and it seemed like the corpse had been in the water for a long time. But this made no sense, because the body had only been seen and reported that morning. The victim wasn't in deep water and was visible from the surface, so there's no way it could have been missed for any length of time. I was puzzled by the body's condition, but my main concern was how to get him up to the surface. I knew I'd need specialist equipment to do so, and was preparing to ascend back up and return to my boat. But then I saw it, and my whole body just froze. "What did you see?" I asked impatiently. Jack finished the rest of his drink before he answered, his voice shaking as he spoke. The dead man's eyes were closed, and then suddenly they weren't. He opened his eyelids and stared straight at me. God, those eyes. They were like nothing I've ever seen in my life. Jet black and soulless. Truly monstrous eyes. I was frozen for a long moment, not believing what I was seeing. But there was more. The corpse opened its mouth and revealed a gaping black hole, which to me looked like a portal to hell itself. Water seeped into his mouth, and I think he was trying to scream. But the sound was muffled underwater. He couldn't move his feet, but the monster reached out towards me with his bony, claw-like hands. Thankfully, I was just out of his reach, but I stumbled backwards and fell down to the seabed. The monster was still screaming, desperately trying to get at me as his black eyes burnt with pure hatred. Well, what can I say? I got the hell out of there and swam back to the surface, leaving the raging monster trapped on the seabed. I reported what I'd seen back to the Nassau police, and the investigating detective looked at me like I was crazy. I began to think that I'd just imagined the whole incident. Had I hallucinated it? Was I going nuts? I did doubt my own sanity. But then the police sent out another diver, and I guess he had a similar experience to me. In fact, I believe he was injured during his dive, as the monster clawed through his suit and skin. After that, the situation escalated. The local authorities didn't know what to do with that creature, and so an expert was called in from the States. I don't know for certain what happened next, but I believe the U.S. government extracted the creature and transported it back to the States. Why? I can't say, and frankly, I don't want to know. Jack's first account ended at this point. I'll confess that my initial instinct was to burst out in laughter, but thankfully I stopped myself after reading Jack's tense body language. I could tell that he wasn't deliberately trying to mislead me or waste my time. His story was ridiculous and surely impossible, but he seemed to genuinely believe this incident had occurred. I imagined he hallucinated the encounter with the undead being on the seabed. Perhaps there had been something toxic in the water, or maybe he was suffering from PTSD as a result of his military service. Either way, I didn't believe his account. In that moment, I didn't know what to say, literally being left speechless by the absurdity of Jack's story. In the end, it was Jack who broke the awkward silence, as it seemed he could read my mind. "You don't believe me, do you?" he exclaimed coolly. "You think I'm full of shit." He looked me straight in the eye as he asked his loaded question, and I suddenly felt very uncomfortable. "I'm sorry, Jack, but it's just not plausible. I'm a professional journalist, and I don't chase after ghosts and ghouls." The call was from a Mr. Smith, and no, I'm not kidding. That was really his name. Andrew Smith worked for the NOAA, which on the surface was a pretty dull civil service job. But Andy headed up a department which wasn't officially on the books. In fact, their entire existence was and still is denied by the federal government. The section Smith managed was called the Oceanic Special Investigation Unit. Again, it's an innocuous name. But what this unit does is extraordinary. "So, this guy gave you a job?" I asked. "Yeah, Jack replied with a nod. He'd heard I'd been asking questions and looked into me. I guess Andy saw something in me and reckoned I could help them out. He was the expert they brought in to deal with the ghoul in the Bahamas. His team successfully captured and contained the creature before handing it over to the military. He doesn't know what happened to it next. Nor do I. Hell, the zombie could still be locked up in Area 51, for all I know. Why my intuition was correct. There were a lot of unexplained mysteries and phenomena in the world's oceans, and the OSIU was tasked with investigating them. Jack spent the next few minutes explaining the structure and remit of the investigative unit and describing his early years working for the agency. He began in the position of junior investigator, but soon worked his way up the ranks under Smith's mentorship. During this time, he was sent around the world on various cases relating to bizarre incidents and sightings in all of the planet's oceans. Jack confirmed that most of these reports were either hoaxes, local myths, or had some kind of logical explanation. The unit might go for years without any legitimate paranormal or cryptid activity, and there would be constant threats from the legislators to cut their funding. But then, a real case would come to the fore, and the powers that be would take notice. The story he told me on that sunny afternoon at the marina was short but unsettling, as he described sightings of an entity simply known as the swimmer. This one started out as another legend, so at first we thought it was more BS. Jack explained, there are accounts of the swimmer throughout history, going back to the time of the Roman Empire. What's interesting, though, is that the same story is replicated across different cultures and civilizations across the globe. In all accounts, the details were eerily similar. Sailors spoke of a single swimmer, a man with bronzed skin, sometimes naked, other times wearing clothing or even a swimsuit. But he's always seen way out at sea. I mean, sometimes this guy's hundreds of miles from the nearest land, way too far for any normal human being to swim. When he's sighted, there are never any other boats in the vicinity and no indication of how he ended up in the open ocean. Weird, huh? But it gets weirder. The captains of many ships have attempted to save the man, but every attempt to hail him or even physically pull the guy from the water have failed. This man or entity remains oblivious and just keeps swimming. Wow, I said in the absence of any other words. The legend was indeed strange and quite chilling, but it sounded like nothing more than a myth. But of course, Jack had more to add. I took the case during the winter of 1988, after reports of the swimmer being sighted in the Atlantic, about 200 miles east of Bermuda. Miss Smith didn't give much credence to the reports, but he sent me to investigate all the same. I hitched a ride on a Navy frigate on patrol, and we were allowed to use their recon helicopter to search for the entity. Honestly, it was potluck that we found him, given that we only had an approximate location. But find him we did, and this time I got proof. At this point, Jack removed his phone from his pocket and played me a video. The original footage was grainy and rough, and did seem to have been recorded on an 80s camcorder, presumably being later converted into a digital video file. The clip had apparently been filmed from a helicopter flying over open water, and I could hear the din of rotor blades through the phone speakers. The chopper was flying in poor weather, and the gray waters below were rough, with heavy waves emerging and breaking with a violent intensity. Suddenly, the cameraman zoomed in, and that's when I saw him. The lone swimmer was face down and dressed in bright red trunks. I couldn't see his face, but the man's actions were extraordinary. I watched awestruck as he swam against the waves, not panicking and somehow remaining above the surface. He didn't look up when the helicopter flew over him and didn't react to the hails from the chopper's loudspeakers. Instead, he just kept on swimming, even as the waves threatened to overwhelm him. The camera focused on the man for several seconds before zooming back out. Next, the cameraman scanned the horizon, confirming that there was no land and no other ships or planes anywhere in sight. All I could see was endless ocean in every direction. And then the footage abruptly ended. I looked up from the screen and saw Jack watching it intently. Wow, I repeated but didn't elaborate. The footage was convincing, but I couldn't guarantee it wasn't staged. Did you find out who he was? I asked. No, Jack confirmed with a shake of his head. It's an unsolved case to this day, but I have my theories. Oh, I said with genuine interest. Jack paused briefly, appearing deep in thought as he looked out to sea. Have you ever heard the legend of the Wandering Jew? It's a medieval fable about a man who taunted Jesus on a cross and was cursed to walk the earth until the second coming. The story sounds familiar, I confirmed. Well, I believe the swimmer is his nautical equivalent. He was once a mortal man, but committed a grave sin. Now he's cursed to swim the world's oceans until the end of time. He doesn't tire, can't sink under the surface, and can never stop. No one can help this poor soul, and so we must leave him to his fate. I felt sick after hearing Jack's theory. I wasn't a religious man and hadn't been inside a church for years. But there was something truly chilling about the idea of a lost soul, a cursed man who was exiled from the land itself and doomed to swim the world's cruel seas for all eternity. Our second meeting ended soon after with Jack telling me to get in touch if I wanted to learn more. Once again, I did my research after the encounter. There are numerous mentions and accounts of the swimmer or swimming man throughout history and across the globe, so that much is true. But I couldn't find the video footage Jack had shown me anywhere online. I didn't believe the video was doctored. It's possible it was staged. The man swimming might have been dropped from the helicopter and then recovered after the film was shot. But why take the risk in such bad weather conditions? It just didn't add up. Nevertheless, by this time I was hooked, and I wasted no time before arranging my next meet-up with Jack. For our third interview, Jack invited me to his home, which I took as a good sign because this surely meant I was gaining his trust. He lived in a small, Spartan one-bedroom apartment not far from the harbor. The flat was tidy and well-kept, but very basic. I noted the various liquor bottles stacked up in the kitchen and wondered whether Jack had a drinking problem. In any event, he offered me a cup of coffee, which I accepted. We sat in his small living room, and I noted the collection of well-thumbed books on the shelves. As one would expect, Jack owned many publications on sailing and naval history, but I noticed other editions on such diverse topics as religion, philosophy, and mythology. I was also surprised to see a pristine copy of the King James's Bible sitting on the coffee table. Jack hadn't struck me as being the religious type, but perhaps what he'd been through had changed his outlook. As for me, I was intrigued but still cynical, yet to be persuaded by Jack's outlandish tales. I watched as Jack set up his TV to stream a video from his phone, and was mildly impressed to see a man of his age who was tech-savvy. He didn't play me the video straight away, instead offering me an explanation. I apologize that I'm not able to share this file with you. The same goes for the swimmer footage. I'm not meant to have these videos, and I'm certainly not allowed to show them to journalists. I'm breaking multiple federal laws by just talking to you now. Call me uncommitted if you will, but I don't want to spend the rest of my life in prison. If and when I die, however, that's a different story. I'm happy to bequeath all the evidence I have to you on the condition that you break this story wide open. Okay, I answered, not quite sure what else to say. Jack leaned in close before asking his question. Well, friend, I'm sure you've heard of the lost city of Atlantis. This time, I couldn't help myself from laughing at the absurdity of his question. Sure. Don't tell me you guys found it. Jack shared in my amusement, sniggering amicably as he answered. No, I'm afraid not. That would have really topped off my career, don't you think? No, we didn't find Atlantis. But we did discover and explore another legendary city which was lost beneath the waves. An ancient city whose very existence challenges everything we thought we knew about human history. With that cryptic introduction, he pressed play on his phone, and the video was beamed onto the TV screen. What we saw was footage from an underwater camera, seemingly attached to a small submarine. It's a remotely operated underwater vehicle, or ROV. Jack confirmed. The footage was taken in 1996, and the technology was state-of-the-art at the time. The film continued as the sub navigated through dark waters and was clearly far below the surface, with the main source of illumination coming from the lights attached to its frame. The sub continued its descent towards a large number of stone buildings, which were inexplicably spread across the seabed. The site was substantial, and I could see a number of smaller, flat-roofed buildings surrounding a trio of large pyramid-type structures. Clearly, we were observing a lost city on the ocean floor, long abandoned by human beings and left to sea creatures and deep-water predators. I continued watching the extraordinary footage, awestruck and mesmerized by what I was witnessing. I had never seen a sight like this before and couldn't help but ask the question, where was the footage taken? I inquired. The Mascarene Plateau, Jack confirmed in a matter-of-fact tone. Northeast of Madagascar and west of the Seychelles. This location is about 150 meters below sea level. My jaw dropped as I continued to watch the submersible's camera as it approached the largest of the lost city's pyramids, perhaps 50 to 60 feet tall, and built with stairs ascending to their summits. I'm no expert in ancient history, but I've never heard of a lost city in this region. I said, "No, you wouldn't have done." Jack replied, "There's no official written records of this civilization ever existing. In fact, all of the historical and geological records say this city shouldn't be there, and yet here it is." What did you learn about this site? I asked impatiently. And why was the discovery never made public? Honestly, we don't know much, was Jack's answer. The archaeologists can't explain the structures and pyramids. They say the building designs include aspects from several different ancient civilizations. Egyptian, Mayan, Cambodian. It seems that this sunken city predates them all. I could well be tens of thousands of years old, and yet the structures are remarkably well preserved. As for why we didn't make it public knowledge, well, the reasons will become apparent. He pointed back towards the screen as the ROV descended into a small open entrance, which led inside the submerged pyramid. I watched intently as the remote-controlled submarine was navigated through a tight corridor inside of the pyramid, its headlights illuminating the path as it dove deeper into the guts of the structure. What really interested me was the mosaic-like pictures displayed on the corridor walls, images which apparently told the story of this lost civilization's disturbing and violent history. I saw depictions of robed priests standing on top of the pyramids, torrential rains falling upon them as the holy men used knives and daggers to slaughter chained prisoners, the blood of their victims flowing down towards the waterline. In the next image, I saw sailboats out on the waves and seamen throwing the bodies of slaves or prisoners overboard into the dark waters below. But most chilling was the monstrous predator under the surface, which was feasting upon the human bodies. The huge creature appeared to be a sea serpent with green scales covering its body, and the monster had 3 heads. The depiction of the beast was chilling, as I saw 3 pairs of burning red eyes and a trio of mouths filled with razor-sharp teeth. Jack surely noticed my shock upon seeing these horrific depictions, and he surprised me by launching into biblical verse. He maketh the deep to boil like a pot. He maketh the sea like a pot of ointment. Upon earth there is not his like, who is made without fear. He beholds all high things. He is a king over all children of pride. He is Leviathan, and this is his kingdom. I gasped, staring at my companion in astonishment, but he didn't elaborate, instead motioning for me to continue watching. Eventually, the submersible exited the lengthy corridor and entered a vast chamber in the very center of the pyramid. No, I'm afraid not. That would have really topped off my career, don't you think? No, we didn't find Atlantis. But we did discover and explore another legendary city which was lost beneath the waves. An ancient city whose very existence challenges everything we thought we knew about human history. With that cryptic introduction, he pressed play on his phone, and the video was beamed onto the TV screen. What we saw was footage from an underwater camera, seemingly attached to a small submarine. It's a remotely operated underwater vehicle, or ROV, Jack confirmed. The footage was taken in 1996 and the technology was state-of-the-art at the time. The film continued as the sub navigated through dark waters and was clearly far below the surface, with the main source of illumination coming from the lights attached to its frame. The sub continued its descent towards a large number of stone buildings which were inexplicably spread across the seabed. The site was substantial, and I could see a number of smaller, flat-roofed buildings surrounding a trio of large pyramid-type structures. Clearly, we were observing a lost city on the ocean floor, long abandoned by human beings and left to sea creatures and deep-water predators. I continued watching the extraordinary footage, awestruck and mesmerized by what I was witnessing. I had never seen a sight like this before and couldn't help but ask the question, where was the footage taken? I inquired. The Mascarene Plateau. Jack confirmed in a matter-of-fact tone. Northeast of Madagascar and west of the Seychelles. This location is about 150 meters below sea level. My jaw dropped as I continued to watch the submersible's camera as it approached the largest of the lost city's pyramids, perhaps 50 to 60 feet tall and built with stairs ascending to their summits. I'm no expert in ancient history, but I'd never heard of a lost city in this region. I said, "No, you wouldn't have done." Jack replied, "There's no official written records of this civilization ever existing. In fact, all of the historical and geological records say this city shouldn't be there, and yet here it is." "What did you learn about this site?" I asked impatiently, "and why was the discovery never made public?" "Honestly, we don't know much," was Jack's answer. "The archaeologists can't explain the structures and pyramids. They say the building designs include aspects from several different ancient civilizations: Egyptian, Mayan, Cambodian. It seems that this sunken city predates them all. I could well be tens of thousands of years old, and yet the structures are remarkably well preserved. As for why we didn't make it public knowledge, well, the reasons will become apparent." He pointed back towards the screen as the ROV descended into a small open entrance which led inside the submerged pyramid. I watched intently as the remote-controlled submarine was navigated through a tight corridor inside of the pyramid, its headlights illuminating the path as it dove deeper into the guts of the structure. What really interested me was the mosaic-like pictures displayed on the corridor walls, images which apparently told the story of this lost civilization's disturbing and violent history. I saw depictions of robed priests standing on top of the pyramids, torrential rains falling upon them, as the holy men used knives and daggers to slaughter chained prisoners, the blood of their victims flowing down towards the waterline. In the next image, I saw sailboats out on the waves and seamen throwing the bodies of slaves or prisoners overboard into the dark waters below. But most chilling was the monstrous predator under the surface, which was feasting upon the human bodies. The huge creature appeared to be a sea serpent with green scales covering its body, and the monster had 3 heads. The depiction of the beast was chilling, as I saw 3 pairs of burning red eyes and a trio of mouths filled with razor-sharp teeth. Jack surely noticed my shock upon seeing these horrific depictions, and he surprised me by launching into biblical verse. "He maketh the deep to boil like a pot. He maketh the sea like a pot of ointment. Upon earth there is not his like, who is made without fear. He beholds all high things. He is a king over all children of pride. He is Leviathan, and this is his kingdom." I gasped, staring at my companion in astonishment, but he didn't elaborate, instead motioning for me to continue watching. Eventually, the submersible exited the lengthy corridor and entered a vast chamber in the very center of the pyramid. My blood froze when the camera focused, and we saw what lay within this chamber of horrors. Inside of the pyramid were the bones of hundreds, if not thousands, of human beings. The walls were decorated with skulls, their empty eye sockets looking down accusingly at the small sea craft which had invaded their long-forgotten tomb. I looked away from the screen in disgust and towards Jack, who ended the video before turning to face me. "There are legends of a lost continent of Lemuria, which was supposedly located in what's now the Indian Ocean," he explained. "It was written off as a myth, but now we discovered proof of its existence. It seems this nameless city was the capital of the lost civilization. As you can see, their leaders and priests practiced human sacrifice on a vast scale. But as horrific as their massacres were, it seems they did serve a purpose. I raised both eyebrows in disbelief and shot him a hard glare. Jack lifted his hands defensively before replying. "Hey, I'm not trying to justify it," he said, but the Lemurians were at the mercy of the beast. Leviathan. I asked in confusion. "Yeah," Jack answered in all seriousness. "Our anthropologists have studied the paintings their people left behind. The Lemurians believed it was necessary to offer up sacrifices to the beast from the deep. This is how they kept their civilization safe. It seems this system worked for a time, but ultimately the beast had his victory, and their city was taken by the sea." "That's not possible," I exclaimed, as finally I reached my limit. "There is no creature like that in the world's oceans. It's simply not possible." Jack smiled knowingly and nodded his head. "There was a time I would have believed you, but I'm sure you know that less than 20% of the ocean has been explored, and in truth we have very little idea of what's down there." "Okay, I get it," was my defensive reply, "but I don't believe a monster like that could exist. A three-headed serpent. Come on, man. Where's your evidence?" "Well, it just so happens I have another story to tell you," said Jack, his blue eyes filled with a fiery intensity. "I will ask you to reserve judgment until you've seen and heard all I've got." I shook my head in disbelief. It seemed I was being led down a rabbit hole, and I didn't like this. But still, Jack had me on his hook, and I couldn't walk away without hearing the full story. There was a strange incident which occurred in the early 90s. Actually, it was quite widely reported at the time. The news got out before we had the chance to bury it. But of course, the public didn't hear the full story. Of course, I repeated, my cynicism returning as I once again questioned this entire enterprise. If Jack picked up on my tone, he didn't let it show, and instead continued his account. In November 2003, a research team tagged a 9-foot female great white shark off the coast of southwestern Australia. 4 months later, records show the shark abruptly dove 2,000 feet with a 32-degree temperature spike. Then the shark disappeared without a trace. Soon after, the tag washed up on shore, but no signs of the shark. The researchers guessed that a large animal came up under the great white and dragged it to the bottom. Now the question is this: what animal could have taken and killed a 9-foot shark? I shrugged my shoulders dismissively before answering. A bigger fish. Jack laughed in amusement. "Yeah, good call," he said. They reckoned it was a larger great white, or possibly an orca. There was no definitive answer, but this theory satisfied most in the scientific community. But there was more that wasn't made public. I sighed aloud but didn't interrupt as Jack went on. "You see, the 9-footer wasn't the only tagged sea creature which ended up dead. In total, there were 4 great whites killed in that part of the ocean in the space of a few months, the biggest of which was a 16-foot male. 2 fully grown orcas were killed too. They didn't recover the trackers in all cases, but the recording showed these animals all died the same way. In all 6 cases, they were taken by something below and dragged down into the deep." My eyes widened as I made the connection in my head, but surely it couldn't be true, could it? Even if all those animals had died, there must be a logical explanation. What we did was set up a trap of sorts. Jack continued. "We obtained the body of a recently deceased 12-foot great white and secured it to a buoy 50 meters below the surface and right in the middle of the unknown predator's hunting grounds. What's more, we attached underwater cameras to monitor the situation and hopefully catch a glimpse of it." I felt my heart beating faster in my chest as I pushed him for more. "What happened?" I demanded. Jack smiled as if he enjoyed keeping me on my toes. "The shark's corpse was floating in the water for 3 days. We were about to give it up and cut the body loose. Then this happened." Once again, he operated his phone and streamed another clip onto his TV. This video was a short one, barely 10 seconds in length. It was that quick. One moment we were looking through an underwater camera facing downwards, down into the dark abyss. Suddenly, something huge emerged from the depths, propelling itself upwards and towards the camera. I only got a quick glimpse of the beast, but its horrifying features were unmistakable. The giant predator which emerged from the darkness had 3 heads with 6 burning red eyes, and a trio of gaping jaws filled with so many rows of sharp teeth. I literally recoiled in my seat, letting out a startled cry as my frightened brain tried to make sense of what I'd just seen. The video cut out a second later, the screen turning to black in an instant as I guessed the camera was swallowed up in the monster's shots. Even though the monster was only on camera for a brief few seconds, Jack was able to show me a still image. The water was dark, and the picture blurred, but I could clearly see the predator in all its hideous glory. A nightmare of teeth and rage with 3 wide maws which looked like entrances to hell itself. And those eyes, all 6 of them burning red with rage, but also with intelligent malice. I had never seen such a creature before, but couldn't help but acknowledge the stark resemblance to the depictions within the sunken city. I left Jack's place soon after, still in a daze and feeling sick to my stomach. I didn't make arrangements for a further meeting, but muttered something about getting in touch as I shuffled towards the door. Jack made it clear that he had more information to share with me, but I think he knew I needed time to process all I'd heard and seen. I'll confess that I poured myself a stiff drink when I got home, and it took me some time to calm down. But once I regained my senses, I started thinking logically, and the doubts returned. The footage I'd seen in Jack's apartment was unsettling, but certainly not conclusive. The videos of the underwater city and 3-headed beast could have been staged or created by CGI. I don't know why Jack or anyone else would have gone to so much bother to do so, but I couldn't rule out the possibility. If Jack was telling me the truth, then there must be supporting evidence. Logs, data, witness statements, etc. Maybe he had access to this information, but for now I couldn't be certain of anything. I told myself that this had to be bullshit, and I was being taken for a ride by Jack Brady. All of my professional instincts told me to walk away, to cut off contact with Jack, and abandon the investigation. But there was something deeper inside which stopped me from doing so. It wasn't just the hunch that I was chasing an important story. Sure, this was part of it. But what I'd learned had awakened something within me. Call it a primal fear or evolutionary reflex. But I was beginning to believe that Jack was right, and there really was something wicked and terrifying in the ocean depths. My eyes widened as I made the connection in my head, but surely it couldn't be true, could it? Even if all those animals had died, there must be a logical explanation. What we did was set up a trap of sorts. Jack continued. We obtained the body of a recently deceased 12-foot great white and secured it to a buoy 50 meters below the surface and right in the middle of the unknown predator's hunting grounds. What's more, we attached underwater cameras to monitor the situation and hopefully catch a glimpse of it. I felt my heart beating faster in my chest as I pushed him for more. What happened? I demanded. Jack smiled as if he enjoyed keeping me on my toes. The shark's corpse was floating in the water for 3 days. We were about to give it up and cut the body loose. Then this happened. Once again, he operated his phone and streamed another clip onto his TV. This video was a short one, barely 10 seconds in length. It was that quick. One moment we were looking through an underwater camera facing downwards, down into the dark abyss. Suddenly, something huge emerged from the depths, propelling itself upwards and towards the camera. I only got a quick glimpse of the beast, but its horrifying features were unmistakable. The giant predator which emerged from the darkness had 3 heads with 6 burning red eyes, and a trio of gaping jaws filled with so many rows of sharp teeth. I literally recoiled in my seat, letting out a startled cry as my frightened brain tried to make sense of what I'd just seen. The video cut out a second later, the screen turning to black in an instant as I guessed the camera was swallowed up in the monster's shades. Even though the monster was only on camera for a brief few seconds, Jack was able to show me a still image. The water was dark and the picture blurred, but I could clearly see the predator in all its hideous glory. A nightmare of teeth and rage with 3 wide maws which looked like entrances to hell itself. And those eyes, all 6 of them burning red with rage, but also with intelligent malice. I had never seen such a creature before, but couldn't help but acknowledge the stark resemblance to the depictions within the sunken city. I left Jack's place soon after, still in a daze and feeling sick to my stomach. I didn't make arrangements for a further meeting, but muttered something about getting in touch as I shuffled towards the door. Jack made it clear that he had more information to share with me, but I think he knew I needed time to process all I'd heard and seen. I'll confess that I poured myself a stiff drink when I got home, and it took me some time to calm down. But once I regained my senses, I started thinking logically, and the doubts returned. The footage I'd seen in Jack's apartment was unsettling, but certainly not conclusive. The videos of the underwater city and 3-headed beast could have been staged or created by CGI. I don't know why Jack or anyone else would have gone to so much bother to do so, but I couldn't rule out the possibility. If Jack was telling me the truth, then there must be supporting evidence, logs, data, witness statements, etc. Maybe he had access to this information, but for now I couldn't be certain of anything. I told myself that this had to be bullshit, and I was being taken for a ride by Jack Brady. All of my professional instincts told me to walk away, to cut off contact with Jack, and abandon the investigation. But there was something deeper inside which stopped me from doing so. It wasn't just the hunch that I was chasing an important story. Sure, this was part of it. But what I'd learned had awakened something within me. Call it a primal fear or evolutionary reflex. But I was beginning to believe that Jack was right, and there really was something wicked and terrifying in the ocean depths. Shadowy form, which seemed to have total control over this hostile environment, and was entirely focused upon me. An intruder in its realm. I couldn't make out its face, but when the entity came closer, I saw its eyes. Burning, orb-like eyes which lit up the darkness. But instead of bringing light to the darkest places, its fire only brought terror to my heart. I struggled once more against the concrete shoes holding me firmly in place, while my screams were drowned out by the rushing water. And the monstrous entity kept on coming, its horrendous eyes burning through me as the darkness it brought with it consumed everything. That's when I awoke to the usual routine, screaming and cold sweat. I couldn't get back to sleep that night. I didn't dare. As soon as the sun rose, I rang Jack and arranged to meet him that same day. For better or for worse, I needed to hear the conclusion to his tale. My voice was shaking when I called Jack, and I'm sure he picked up on my discomfort over the phone. On this occasion, I invited him to meet in my own home. I normally would never do this with any source, but I justified the decision in my head, telling myself that it would be better to be on my home turf to ensure he didn't play any tricks when presenting his evidence. But in reality, I felt very unsettled and didn't feel comfortable leaving my home. It's crazy when you think about it. I've faced some significant challenges and dangerous situations during my career, but the vivid nightmares I'd experienced recently have really shook me. Jack arrived at my apartment early, just after 9 a.m. as I recall. I tried to make myself look presentable, but couldn't hide the bags under my eyes and cold sweat on my brow. Jack looked his usual self when he arrived at my front door, with a tough exterior barely hiding the sadness and vulnerability within him. My visitor gave me a suspicious look when he first saw me, but made no comment as I invited him inside. It was only when he was settled and seated in my living room that he asked me a question which was really more of a statement. "You've been having nightmares, haven't you?" Jack asked. My jaw dropped as I stared into Jack's deadpan eyes. I experienced a combination of emotions, and a tense moment passed before I was able to speak. "How the hell did you know that?" I eventually asked. Jack nodded his head, his eyes dropping as he appeared to look guilt-ridden. "I'm sorry, pal," he replied, I should have warned you this was a possibility. All of the staff in the OSI who have suffered through it. I thought the nightmares wouldn't affect you because you're only hearing these accounts secondhand. I guess I was wrong. I took a deep breath as I collapsed onto my couch and tried to process what I'd just been told. What Jack said didn't make any sense. How could the stories he told me infiltrate my subconscious to such a great extent? Surely it must be a coincidence. But even so, it was my job to discover and investigate uncomfortable truths, and I knew I had to emotionally distance myself to do this work. So why was I so angry with Jack for exposing me to this? I did my best to suppress my negative emotions and remain professional and hospitable. Can I offer you a cup of coffee? I asked my guest. Jack shot me a half grin and a wink before reaching into his jacket pocket and withdrawing a quarter bottle of whiskey. I thought we might take something stronger, he said coyly. I did my customary raising of my eyebrow before I glanced down at my watch. It's a bit early, isn't it? I said in a self-righteous tone. Trust me, you're going to need a stiff drink by the end of this. Jack answered firmly. Now, I suggest you fetch us 2 glasses. I reluctantly pulled myself up from the couch and shuffled over to the kitchen. At first, I only took 1 shot glass from the cupboard, but then I thought again and picked up a second. I set the 2 glasses down on my coffee table beside Jack's bottle. By then, my hospitality had reached its limit as I demanded answers from my guest. What have you got for me, old-timer? I asked firmly. Jack smiled faintly, perhaps impressed by my straight-to-business attitude. Well, my friend, he began, you've done your due diligence, so I'm sure you're familiar with the book. I thought for a moment before remembering where I'd heard this odd name before. Yes, I believe so, I eventually answered, as my exhausted brain retrieved the stored information. I understand the bloop was an unidentified underwater sound detected by the NOAA during the late 90s. Correct. Jack confirmed coolly. The sound was detected in the South Pacific in 1997 by a system of listening devices used to monitor undersea seismic activity, amongst other things. It can be categorized as an ultra-low frequency and high amplitude. Initially, there was a theory made public that the source was a living creature, one which would have a much more powerful call than any known animal in Earth's oceans. Officially, it remained a mystery, but in 2012, the NOAA stated that the sound was consistent with glacial movements and most likely caused by ice cowling. I laughed nervously as I believed I knew where this was going. Let me guess, the 2012 story was a cover-up, and there really is a gigantic creature swimming around out there. Jack didn't replicate my laughter as he answered in a matter-of-fact tone. Maybe so. I can't really say for sure. It wasn't my case, and so I didn't receive a full briefing. Saying that, it's quite possible the bloop came from a huge and yet undisclosed sea creature. We've discovered a number of animals in the depths which have never been revealed to the public, and it's safe to assume there are a lot more down there, waiting to be found. He paused for a moment to let this statement sink in. But I'm not here to talk to you about sea monsters, not this time. I'm afraid I need to tell you about a far greater threat, an ancient, unspeakable evil we unwittingly unleashed upon our world. And it all started with an unidentified underwater sound, one which led us to a very dark place. Sounds ominous, I said in an attempt to make light of the situation, although my stomach was actually in knots. Jack sighed deeply as if reluctant to continue, but he eventually did talk. 2 years ago, our sound surveillance system detected an unidentified signal from the South Atlantic, about 300 miles south of the Falkland Islands. Now, we've picked up mysterious sounds before, of course, including the bloop. Most turn out to have natural origins, underwater avalanches, whale songs, and so forth. But this sound wasn't like anything we've detected before. The initial recording was scratchy and of poor quality, but one thing was clear. What we heard was a human voice, a female voice to be precise. My blood froze and eyes widened as I stared at Jack in astonishment. How is that possible? I exclaimed in dismay. We had no idea, Jack answered truthfully, but the top brass wanted us to investigate. We sent a listening ship down to the location the signal was first detected, and I was a part of the crew. We sailed south from Port Stanley, anchored in the icy Antarctic waters, and switched on our hydrophone array. And then we waited. I'll admit that I was skeptical and believed we'd come home empty-handed, but we were only on location for a few hours before our sensors picked up the signal as clear as day. With that, Jack withdrew his phone from his jacket pocket with a shaking hand. His finger poised over the screen for a tense moment before he pressed down and played the audio file. I sat forward and listened intently as the recording began with the familiar sound of rushing water. But after a moment, this sound was interrupted by a clear voice which spoke in perfect English. I don't know how exactly to describe the voice. It was clearly female, but monotone and emotionless, as if reading from a script. There was something chilling and foreboding about the vocalization. The woman's voice sounded eerily familiar, yet I couldn't quite place where I knew it from. I will provide a transcript of the communication here, but will exclude certain details for reasons that will become obvious. And what she said was this: "This is a message to the beings of the mortal realm, to those who inhabit the lands above us. We have the answers you seek. The mysteries of the land and seas will be revealed." What followed was a series of numbers which Jack confirmed were coordinates and a specific date and time, details which I will not publicly reveal. "Come to this place and speak these words, ex nihilo nihil fit, sanguis meus tibi. Come to us, and all will be revealed." Jack stopped the recording without delay, his body trembling and face pale. "I'm going to need that drink now," he said shakingly. I complied without question, pouring my companion a large glass of whiskey and getting one for myself too. We shared a stiff drink before Jack composed himself enough to go on. The message continued on a loop for about an hour, he explained, at which point our microphones malfunctioned, and we lost the signal. But that wasn't the scariest part. In a matter of minutes, the water temperature rose dramatically. I mean, it sent from sub-zero to near boiling, like hell itself was rising to the surface. This should have been impossible, and yet I swear it's the truth. He paused for a moment to take another deep gulp of hard liquor. As you can imagine, this event caused considerable fear amongst the crew. But thankfully, the water temperature soon dropped, and we wasted no time in lifting anchor and leaving the area. Our equipment was fried, but we had the audio recording which we brought home to our superiors. I nodded my head in fascination. Jack's story was insane, but I was hanging on his every word. And now I really did believe the old sea dog. I had many questions, but one in particular came to mind. The words in Latin, what did they mean? I asked shakingly. Jack delayed for a long and tense moment before answering, although he was unable to meet my eye as he whispered the translation. "Nothing comes from nothing." My blood freezed. My heart almost stopped, and I took a deep breath before asking my next question. "What did you do next?" Jack snorted before taking another drink. "I'll tell you what we should have done. Nothing." I argued strongly that the message should be ignored. We were dealing with powers we didn't understand, and there was a distinct possibility we were being lured into a trap. The coordinates communicated in the message were located right in the middle of the Challenger Deep. You're familiar with this region? Sure, I replied after a second's thought. The deepest point of the seabed, located in the Mariana Trench, Western Pacific. I believe the Trieste was the first sub to descend to its depths in 1960. And didn't James Cameron do a solo descent? Yeah, Jack replied with a laugh. The Hollywood big shot went down in the Deep Sea Challenger in 2012. There's been a number of further descents in the years since, although I doubt anyone will be going down anytime soon. Not after the incident. What the hell happened? I asked through trembling lips. Jack emptied his glass, pouring himself another before answering. Andy Smith was the former OSIU head who recruited me. He was retired by this time. I won't name his replacement, but you can probably uncover his identity with some digging. Suffice to say, the new boss was a real arrogant son of a bitch. and ambitious too. Like I said, I argued against the expedition, and I wasn't the only one to do so. But in every generation and organization, there's some asshole who thinks he can take on the gods, who keeps pushing the boundaries and doesn't think about the consequences. And of course, this occasion was no different. He set down his glass, angry tears forming in his eyes as he held his phone in a shaking hand. We had the time, date, location, and instructions, Jack explained, and we followed them to the letter. The submersible used for the operation was called DSV Voyager. Its design and specifications were closely modeled on the limiting factor, which has made several expeditions to the deepest point. But Voyager was specifically modified for this mission and put under the control of the OSIU. Voyager had a two-man crew, Collins and Rodriguez. Both were Navy men with decades of experience working and piloting submersibles. These guys were professionals and trained to deal with every conceivable scenario. But nothing could have prepared these men for the hell we sent them into. Just like lambs to the slaughter. Those poor bastards. He paused, sighing deeply as he looked down at his glass. I'm going to play the final communication with the Voyager's crew on the day of the mission. I must warn you, it's not an easy listen. I braced myself, not quite knowing what to expect, but realizing it surely wouldn't be good. I heard a two-way radio call between the Voyager and their HQ on the surface. It reminded me of a conversation between astronauts and their command and control back on Earth. Houston, we have a problem. This transmission wasn't coming from outer space, but the pioneers were in an environment just as alien and dangerous. Nevertheless, the aquanauts were calm and professional whilst delivering their updates, initially at least. Touchdown. Welcome to the bottom of the world, gentlemen. 10,920 meters below the ocean's surface. Roger that, Voyager, said a male voice at the other end. Please provide your status updates. We've safely docked on the ocean bed at the precise coordinates provided. The pressure hull is intact. The environment is stable. We're ready when you are, Commander. Very well, said the anonymous naval officer. There was a lengthy pause before the next transmission, which I guess was due to discussions taking place on the surface. Finally, though, the commander communicated his orders. Very good, Voyager. You are authorized to proceed. Please broadcast the message. Roger that, sir. A moment later, and we heard those ominous Latin words being blasted through the speakers, the sound muffled by the intense pressure but somehow still audible. Ex nihilo nilfid, sangus meus tiber. The voice continued on a loop, repeating over and blaring out into the deepest, darkest ocean on Earth. I shook my head in disbelief, stunned that anyone in a position of authority could order such a reckless mission. Whilst doing so, I looked Jack in the eye and was met by a hard stare. We continued to listen to the audio recording as all hell broke loose. It started with a low rumbling sound, which slowly grew louder and more intense. "A command, we're getting some significant seismic activity down here," said the pilot, his previously calm voice now beginning to crack. "Please repeat, Voyager," came the confused reply from the surface. A second panicked voice called out from the submersible. "Oh my God. The seabed is opening up. Stay calm, Voyager. Enact the emergency protocols. The external temperature is rising rapidly," said the pilot. "The water is turning red. Sweet Jesus, what the hell is happening? Voyager, tell me what you see. Do you copy? They're all around us. They're coming for us. What's all around you, Voyager? What is happening down there? They're not human. They look like men, but they're not. These beasts, these demons, they come from the shadows. Their eyes, oh God, those damn eyes. They see everything. God damn it, Collins. Pull yourself together. It's too late. They're inside us. We can't fight it any longer. Rodriguez, he's gone. The air's running out. The pressure is building. On my God." There followed several seconds of mania, blood-curdling screams, and then silence. Nothing but static from the submarine as the commander pointlessly screamed down the line. Voyager, do you copy? Voyager, answer me, damn you. At this point, Jack abruptly ended the audio recording, leaving me in stunned silence. There was so much for my terrified brain to process in that moment, but one thing in particular came to mind: the shadowy humanoid entities with burning eyes. I rang Jack at 5 a.m. the next morning and found he was already up. He sounded strange over the phone, but we arranged to meet at the marina shortly after sunrise. Jack told me this would be our last meeting, and he would provide all the evidence I needed to publish my story. I hoped he wasn't serious about this being the final time we'd meet. This story has affected me like none other, infecting my subconscious and taking over my entire life. There was no one else I could talk to about this. Jack Brady was the only other person who understood. I arrived at the marina shortly after dawn, sitting on the bench for almost an hour while I waited for my companion. I looked out to sea and saw a storm forming on the far horizon, with black clouds and powerful waves clearly visible. I thought little about this at the time, however. Jack was running late, which wasn't like him. I tried ringing his number, but it went straight to voicemail. That's when I started to worry. I remembered from our previous meeting that Jack's prized yacht, the Nautilus, was docked in the marina, and I wondered whether he was working on the boat. I made my way along the jetty, keeping a weary eye on the water in the storm front, which was rapidly moving in my direction. To my surprise, the Nautilus wasn't in its mooring. I scanned the marina and saw Jack's boat afloat and gliding towards the harbor entrance with its sails down and motor running. And Jack was at its helm, steering the boat and heading out to sea. Panic overcame me as I ran down the jetty and shouted out his name. I remembered what he'd told me on our second meeting, that he hadn't been to sea since his retirement and never intended to go out again. He might have changed his mind, of course, but something felt very wrong. Jack was sailing directly out towards the incoming storm, and he didn't respond to my increasingly desperate calls. Instead, Jack looked directly out to sea, a steadfast determination on his face, whilst his eyes were extremely focused, as if he was bewitched or stuck in a trance. I ran to the very edge of the jetty as the storm closed in, and I was assaulted by heavy winds and rain. I continued to scream until my lungs could do no more. Jack didn't turn back, and his boat sailed straight into the violent storm. I contacted the Coast Guard right away, and they began a search as soon as was possible. The storm was intense and violent, but short-lived. The Nautilus was found later that day, capsized and barely afloat. Jack Brady wasn't on board and was nowhere in the vicinity. The search continued for 3 days, but no trace was found, and eventually it was called off. The authorities concluded that Jack was lost at sea and drowned. No one could explain why an experienced seaman had set out during a severe storm without taking any of the standard precautions. Many thought he'd taken his own life, but I knew better. Surely whatever evil had been set free had finally overcome Jack Brady, forcing him to make the fatal sea journey which claimed his life. Jack was gone, but he'd left me a parting gift. Due to the chaos of that day, it would be several hours before I checked my emails on my phone. When I did so, I discovered a message from Jack's account, an email with no subject line and only containing a hyperlink. In normal circumstances, I would have deleted the email as spam, but instead I clicked on the link which led to a Dropbox. Saved inside the folder was a literal treasure trove of evidence and data. All of the video and audio recordings Jack had played for me during our meetings and much more. This included logs, witness statements, intelligence reports, and countless other photographs and documents, which surely proved beyond reasonable doubt that Jack's accounts were true. If I had the time, I would still do my due diligence, investigating and studying every document and confirming their veracity whilst following up on leads and seeking out further witnesses. But I fear the ocean's call. My time feels limited, and so I write this in haste. Whatever force has taken over Jack now lingers in my mind. It's not just my dreams that are haunted by disturbing visions. During the day, I find myself inexplicably drawn to the ocean. I spend hours at the water's edge, staring out to sea, an overwhelming urge rising from within me as I feel a pull toward the vast, unyielding abyss. I'm fighting with every ounce of my strength, but I fear it's only a matter of time before the forces now controlling the sea take my mind and soul. And so, in a desperate act, I reach out. It's clear that our leaders cannot stop the dark powers they've unknowingly unleashed, and their primary concern seems to be protecting their own involvement. Yet, even if I am doomed, I still hold hope for humanity. I share Jack's story in the hope that someone reading it might find a way to stop this force before it destroys us. The clues are surely out there, ancient wisdom or knowledge that once kept these malevolent beings at bay for generations. There must be a way. The end, or is it? Hello, my name is Max Regnier. My story begins at the end, or if I'm honest, at the beginning of something worse. I've been consigned to a place of torment. If you've ever read Dante's Inferno, you might remember the punishment of the miserly. Those who hoarded wealth and those who squandered it are condemned to roll enormous bags of money in opposite directions, trying to crash into one another. The one who falls first is whipped until they rise again, only to start the cycle anew. The winner receives a single gold coin, which can be traded for one brief respite before the cycle repeats. I don't know how long I've been here. Time seems to stretch and twist in this place, much like a sunset that never fades. The sounds of suffering echo all around me, but I try to block them out. There may be brief moments of rest here, but there is no comfort. That's why I find myself in this endless struggle. But can you blame me? I did everything I could to make ends meet. I worked long hours as a hospital janitor, dealing with the messes people left behind. There are some things you don't forget, like the filth I had to clean up. Dirty diapers, overflowing trash cans, and toilets clogged with waste. Things no one should have to deal with. I worked hard, but it never seemed to matter. My paycheck barely covered my bills, and I still felt stuck. Another opponent, another miser. I thrust my chest forward, pushing as hard as I can. Our bags crash together. The other man falls to the ground, and in an instant, a demon is on him, lashing him with a braided whip. He cries out in pain but struggles to rise. After another brutal strike, he's back on his feet and shoves past me. The demon hands me a coin. I could save it, trade it for more rest, but I can only keep what fits in the pockets of my ragged clothes. So I return the coin. 60 seconds to breathe. 60 seconds to reflect on my life. A minute feels like an eternity here. I remember a cold Friday in October. I was in the cafeteria, eating lunch as usual. The rain drizzled down the window, blocking my view of the parking lot. The fluorescent lights hummed above. I wasn't hungry, but I ate anyway. The chicken tenders and potato wedges were hot but bland. I chewed mechanically, reviewing my morning. 2 toilets had overflowed. Waste and soggy paper towels had spilled everywhere. Whoever caused the mess had already disappeared. My supervisor wasn't pleased when he walked in, and even less so when I used colorful language to describe the situation. He wrote me up, and I became even angrier. That was the second time in 2 weeks. One more strike, and I'd lose a part of my pay. I couldn't afford that. Rent was due, and my car was in the shop. Someone had left a newspaper on a nearby table, and I picked it up. Maybe there was a better job out there. A job more fitting for someone with a college degree in computer science. But entry-level positions were everywhere. I had over $40,000 in student loans to pay off. This job kept me barely afloat. The classifieds offered the usual jobs. Truck drivers, CNAs, waitstaff, etc. One ad caught my eye. A background of stars and planets with a slogan. Gateway Travail. It's out of this world. It sounded cheesy, but it made me smile. I needed something to cheer me up on that dreary day. I checked out the place's address and phone number. It wasn't far from the hospital. I made a deal with myself. If the rain stopped by the time I took my afternoon break, I'd leave early and check out Gateway Travel. If not, I keep working and forget all about it. I'd like to think the weather sealed my fate, but in hell, I know better. By 3 o'clock, the rain had turned to a cold mist. I decided to take the rest of the day off. My boss wasn't pleased, but I didn't mind. He wasn't the one who had been working nonstop. On the way to my destination, I dodged several puddles. It was located in a strip mall next to a Chinese restaurant and across the street from a shop called Cinderella's Curios. I smirked at the name, but had no intention of going there. The sign on the door to Gateway Travel read OPN. The place was small and unassuming, with travel brochures all over the walls. Most of them featured tropical paradises: Hawaii, Fiji, Jamaica, the Bahamas. There were a few showcasing national parks too. I'd never gone to any of those places. Chances were, I never would. That didn't stop me from approaching the friendly receptionist. "Hey," I said, "I'm looking to go on vacation." "Then you've come to the right place," she replied, smiling warmly. "Welcome to Gateway Travel. I'm Rachel. I'll let my boss know you're here." She pushed a button on an intercom and did just that. "Please have a seat. It'll be just a few minutes." I sat down, trying not to seem too eager. Rachel cleared her throat. "Excuse me, my eyes are up here." "Sorry," I said, realizing I had been a bit distracted. She smiled, and I couldn't help but notice her cheerful demeanor. I pulled out my phone and checked for any new messages. None. I was about to check my Instagram feed when a man in a business suit approached me. "Good afternoon. My name is Richard Plutus. How may I help you today?" "Hi. I'm looking to get away from it all. Do you have a destination in mind? How about somewhere far from the city?" I said, not sure where I wanted to go. "I understand. What do you enjoy doing when you're away?" "I don't know. Maybe relax. Veg out in front of the TV. You can do that at home. How about something a little more exciting? I run a casino you might have heard of, Plutus Palazzo. I don't gamble. You don't have to. There are also shows and entertainment options." I shrugged. "Sounds great, but I don't have the money right now. I'm offering a complimentary voucher for tomorrow." "Oh yeah. I'm still on a tight budget. The buffet is excellent." I didn't feel hungry, but I couldn't resist. "Thanks, but no thanks. How about I sweeten the deal? $200 comp to your tab." Seriously? Seriously? "Well, you've certainly made my day," I said, amused by his persistence. "Nice place you've got here, but I've got to go. Your name is Max Regner. You're 28 with a degree, but you're in debt. You don't gamble, not because you dislike it, but because you're afraid of losing more. You hate your job and wish your boss would leave you alone. I can help with that." "Wait, what? You're a scammer, aren't you?" "No." The word sent chills down my spine. "I can make you a very rich man. I am Plutus, the god of wealth." "Okay, now I know you're crazy." I started to leave. He held out the voucher to me. I froze. "See if I'm as good as my word. Come tomorrow to the local riverboat. The address is on the voucher." I should have torn it up. Instead, I put it in my pocket. "Good man." Richard Plutus turned and left. Rachel waited for me to leave as well. Before I left, I asked for her number, and to my surprise, she gave it to me. When I got home, I thought about coming to my senses and dismissing the voucher, but curiosity got the better of me. If the voucher was a scam, I'd lose nothing. If it was real, who knows what I could gain. Saturday, my official day off, was as bright and clear as Friday had been gray and miserable. Jogging down to the riverboat in the brisk fall air was a joy. A bouncer greeted me at the top of its gangplank. I handed the voucher over, and he gave me a curt nod. How many other folks had gotten one of these? The casino was hella crowded. People sat at banks of noisy slot and video poker machines, mindlessly pushing buttons and slash or waiting for the autoplay feature to finish. Servers brought drinks which may or may not have been free. No one was at the roulette wheel, keno board, blackjack, or poker tables, which I thought was odd. Maybe they'd be active at night. I went to one of the vacant devices. It hungrily sucked my dollar into its slot, then showed several rows of digital symbols. I pushed play. The symbol spun and spun. I realized I had a chance of winning on any of the displayed rows. Unfortunately, none of the 777s, cherries, and bars ended up matching. Not even two. The machine played its loser theme. Womp, womp, and reset itself. So much for excitement. I vowed that I wasn't going to lose one more cent to that one-armed bandit. As I stood up and got ready to leave the riverboat, a cute cocktail waitress approached and asked if I wanted a drink. Sure, I enjoyed alcohol but didn't want to get drunk at it. What time was it anyway? My phone didn't get any reception, so I couldn't tell. There were also no clocks anywhere. If the head of Gateway Travel was right, I had $200 on my voucher. Great, but what else could I do besides feed the monsters? Machines. There you are. Richard Plutus, wearing a snazzy red suit and black bow tie, came up to me. I've been looking for you everywhere. Let me see your voucher. I offered it to him. He scanned it with something that looked like a laser pointer. Congratulations. You're the lucky winner of a stay in my VIP lounge. Whatever you wish is my command, and everything is free. Drinks, games, girls, and so on. Girls, the creme de la creme, or if you prefer the company of gentlemen. Nah, I'm straight. How long can I stay in the lounge? 3 hours. Like I said, you're very fortunate. Plutus led the way through the maze of occupied machines and empty table games. The riverboat seemed way bigger on the inside than the outside. Maybe that was because I could barely see in the dim ambient lighting. Another piece of hired muscle greeted us at the door to the VIP lounge. "Hey boss," he said, then glared at me. "Password, asshole." Plutus answered something that wasn't in English. "Lucrum super omnia." "Give him your voucher, Max. He'll keep it until your session is complete." I obeyed. The bouncer punched in a code on the door's keypad, and it clicked open. Unlike the rest of the casino, the VIP lounge was brightly lit, with velvet furniture and a crystal chandelier. Very classy, but the female servers' outfits left nothing to the imagination. G-strings and tassels. I swallowed so hard it hurt. "Hi, what would you like?" One of them asked, pursing her full red lips. I almost said you, but took a deep breath instead. I never got my club soda. "How about a real drink?" "It's 5 o'clock somewhere." I smiled and shrugged. "What the hell? I'll have a double on the rocks." It tasted so good going down. The burn in my throat, the ease with which the liquid flowed into my stomach, the aftertaste. What kind of bourbon was it? Not the kind I usually bought. This was top shelf, maybe off the shelf. After that, things got a little blurry. The waitresses brought me hors d'oeuvres, including stuffed mushrooms and chicken sautés. It was all scrumptious. I couldn't stop stuffing my face. I asked for another double. I heard the words lap dance and free. I obliged. If this was heaven, I never wanted to get off the boat. In the corner of my eye, I spotted Plutus. "Having a good time?" he asked. "The best. Thanks for bringing me here." "My pleasure." At the Palazzo, unlike other casinos, luck favors the unlucky. I knew you were a winner the first time I saw you at Gateway Travel. "Let's talk business." I blinked. "What?" "This way." He gestured toward the door with a beckoning finger. I tried to stand, but my legs felt like jelly. I slumped back into the plush chair. Plutus didn't wait. He grabbed my hand, his touch cold and firm. It felt like stone. Disgust flared inside me. Did he have arthritis? But before I could pull away, he yanked me up, and I followed him into his office. It was just like I imagined a rich man's office would be. A massive polished wooden desk, a gleaming nameplate, and a Persian rug on the floor. Real plants, too. The kind that says, "I'm important." and I can afford to look after something fragile. Bookshelves lined the back wall. I couldn't help but wonder if there was a safe hidden behind them. "No," he said, as if reading my thoughts. I jumped. Had I said that out loud? "Sit down." I nearly collapsed into the chair, hardwood instead of velvet, with a cushion that didn't do much to ease the discomfort. "You're Max. You can call me Rich." "Ah, hey, Rich. Now that we're on a first-name basis, let's get down to it. I need a partner. Someone who appreciates the finer things in life, but doesn't let circumstances stand in their way. Someone hungry for success. Most importantly, someone who hates losing." He steepled his fingers, forming a pyramid. "Do you, Max?" "Hell yeah. In my line of work, I face plenty of competition. There are casinos, travel agencies, you name it. But I'm looking to expand, and I need someone to help with the visibility. Someone who understands social media and can drown out the trolls." I nodded, not entirely sure where this was going. "You'll also learn about money management, stocks, bonds, hedge funds. I own them all. You'll take a share of the profits, and everything else you desire will come with it. More booze, more strippers, maybe. Like a nice house, maybe servants." I asked, trying to gauge his sincerity. "If that's what you want." He replied with a grin that didn't quite reach his eyes. "But let's talk about what's really important. What about your job at the hospital?" I shrugged. "Screw it. Someone else can clean up after the messes. I'm in." "And your boss. You still want him gone?" A smirk tugged at my lips. "The sooner, the better." I'd love to hear that he dropped dead. "Be careful," he warned, his voice low. "Harboring that kind of hatred can cause stress. Stress leads to heart attacks, maybe even strokes." I didn't care. He's done enough to me. I'm done with him. Plutus nodded in agreement. "Understood. Now, the final question. Are you willing to take the ultimate risk? Are you ready to stake your soul for the life you've always dreamed of?" I hesitated. I didn't believe in souls. Not really. But the tremor in my hands told me I was lying to myself. "Yeah, I'll do it. I'm not afraid. Welcome aboard, Max." Plutus and Rainier. It has a nice ring to it. We shook hands, and once again, his grip was cold and firm like stone. He leaned back, a wicked smile spreading across his face. "Here's your first lesson. The password to the VIP lounge is lucrum super omnia, profit above all." I walked out of that office feeling different, like I had just stepped into a new world. I quit my job at the hospital the next day, and under Plutus' guidance, I started making more money than I ever thought possible. The anxiety that had plagued me for years started to fade. I paid off my student loans, moved into a new place, and believe it or not, started dating Rachel, the receptionist I had barely noticed before. Things were good. Then they got even better when Rachel told me she was pregnant. I refused to admit that I was living in a house of cards. Plutus called me into his office on my 3rd anniversary of meeting him. "Max, my boy," he cried. "Have a seat." This time I didn't fall into the chair. "First of all, I'd like to congratulate you on your progress. I've seen quick studies, but the business of finance suits you like water suits a duck. You've done a magnificent job managing my portfolios. Second, I hear you're about to become a father. Would you like a cigar?" "The finest from Havana." I passed. I didn't smoke. "Ah, well, the next thing I have to tell you is quite personal on my part." I leaned forward. "Go ahead." Plutus coughed into his sleeve. "As I told you at Gateway Travel, I'm something more than mortal. I'm a god, but not the omnipotent or omniscient kind. If I were, I'd have figured out the problem of mortality. I haven't yet. I only know a stopgap measure to hold off death. In short, I need a new body." I trembled all over, as I had before. "You need me. That's why you picked me. I'm young and strong, only 31. I can give you a nice, long life." "Indeed you can. but I was thinking of someone much younger. You want my child. Plutus pointed his index finger at me like a gun. Bingo. Advertisements. No way. I'll never give him to you. Or her. I started breathing hard. I don't think you understand. If you refuse me now, it will be as if you always had. Like if you'd gone to Gateway Travel and turned down my casino voucher. However, I can't rewind time. All I can do is cancel our contract and impose a penalty. The good things you have right now will disappear. Your career, your mansion, your employees, your wealth portfolio, everything. All gone for good. Rachel too. Plutus nodded. That can't be. She loves me and won't leave me. She'll do as I say. We entered into a lesser arrangement, since she works as my receptionist instead of my financer. But she's still responsible for upholding it. What did my wife want? To pay off her student loans. Lo and behold, I was disappointed in her lack of ambition. But I gave her what she wanted. Also, free travel. He grinned with a new set of teeth. Teeth that had points. I never noticed he had dentures before. So whether I say yes or no, you're still going to take my kid. Another nod. If you choose to give them up voluntarily, so much the better. Life will get even sweeter for you. You'll join the ranks of the multimillionaires. If not, he sighed. I'm afraid the penalty is joining the ranks of the damned on my home planet. My travel agency is only a portal. I rule the fourth circle of hell. Words fell out of my mouth that I regret every single moment I'm here. Make me a billionaire instead, and we have a deal. Your wife will have to agree to these terms. She is the child's mother. Don't worry. Doubt flashed through my mind. She was so excited about our future bundle of joy that I was sure nothing could make her happier. Not even millions of dollars. I'll convince her. You must. Otherwise, this new contract is null and void with the old one. My mouth fell open. Plutus shrugged. I told you the risks were high. When I got home, Rachel and I had the biggest fight of our 2.5-year marriage. She said she'd rather die than give our son or daughter to Plutus. I pointed out that she'd bargained with him too. Why hadn't he approached her? Rachel said he might. She had an appointment with him the next day. I told her not to go. She said she had free will and could do as she pleased. She also said that if this new deal was legit, she'd give anything to stop him, even her own soul. You'd rather go to hell than save yourself and everything we've gained so far. Rachel's eyes teared up. Sacrifice, Max. It's what parents make for their children. She stunned me with that statement. So simple, so true, so eternally binding. 3 years ago, a serial killer terrified my small hometown. He was referred to as the Chase Pond Slasher. He was called it because he murdered 4 people near a pond with that name. 3 bodies were found in the forest, and the other was in the pond itself. The terror lasted for 6 months until he was finally caught. At least, everyone thought the right man was caught. That is until 3 more people went missing a month ago. All 3 were last seen around Chase Pond, but there's been no sign of any of them since. I live in Arkansas and have my entire 31 years of life. My town is basically in the middle of nowhere and boasts a proud population of just under 4,000. I work doing odd jobs as my dad taught me a wide range of skills growing up. My favorite of these skills is scuba diving. I've dived in the ocean as well as many lakes, ponds, and rivers. I've recovered bodies and sunken objects, repaired dams, and various other tasks that gained me a solid payday. Advertisements. I was the one who found the body in Chase Pond about 2.5 years ago, and it traumatized me a bit. The brutality was something to behold. I swore to myself I wasn't going to dive in that pond anymore. It just has an unsettling aura to me now. The whole area makes me feel sick. That all changed when I heard 3 people had gone missing near the pond. A woman and a couple, all of which were in their early 20s. The surrounding area and the pond were searched, but nothing was found, and now people are panicking. Everyone believes the Chase Pond Slasher is back. and the wrong man was caught. Unfortunately for me, I know something everyone else doesn't, and it means I'm going to have to get back in the waters of the infamous pond. There aren't any other divers who live anywhere near here, so no one else besides me searched the pond when the original murders took place. It sounds like this time they brought someone in to look, as I made it clear to the police I couldn't do it again. He didn't have any luck, so authorities moved on to the woods pretty quickly. The only problem is the pond is so murky and deep. I don't believe an outsider would be able to search it thoroughly enough in the time frame he had. For some reason, the search was only about a day and a half. The police chief told me they moved on so fast because they had reason to believe the missing people were somewhere in the forest. I asked him what they found that made them think that, but he refused to tell me. I know the chief well. His name is Silas, and he's been a family friend my whole life. After pressuring him some, he eventually admitted to me that the diver had to leave because a bus went off a bridge outside of Little Rock. I heard about it on the news. It's a really awful situation. 8 people are presumed to be deceased. They needed all the help they could get, so the diver left with a promise he would return. 2 weeks have passed since he had to leave, and there hasn't been any update on when he's coming back. I even thought about going myself, but I know I'm needed here now more than ever. The story about the missing people likely being somewhere in the woods was completely made up. Police just want to calm everyone down as much as they can. The amount of fear and anger has been insane. They've been under constant pressure to turn up something, and since there's only about 15 of them, it's been very difficult. I know there are people here who are more than willing to take the law into their own hands if they don't. The truth is they haven't found any evidence in the forest, not even the smallest bit. Silas, or Cy, as everyone calls him, said they could easily still be out there. The search certainly isn't ending anytime soon, although he did confide in me that he believes the missing people are probably somewhere in the pond. It took me 5 days to find the body last time, and it wasn't even hidden at all. There was a cinder block tied to each leg, and he was floating off the bottom right in the middle. I missed him by what must have only been a few feet multiple times before I accidentally bumped into the body. If the missing people are in the pond and hidden under a sunken log or large rock, odds are you wouldn't ever see them. That's why I know I have to go look again. The diver may never return, and I'm the only one who has the ability and time to search the pond top to bottom. I don't want to, but I can't stop thinking about the poor families of the missing people whom guilt has overcome me. If anyone can find the bodies, it's me. So that's what I'm going to do. I hope I'm wrong, and that all 3 are just lost out in the woods. But like Cy, something tells me they're somewhere on the bottom of that horrible pond, waiting to be found. I drove slowly down the long, quiet dirt road that led to the pond. The road is severely unkempt, and most people over the age of 25 avoid the area. It was known as a bit of a hangout for young people to drink and do drugs. When the murders happened, though, even most teenagers stopped going. Now that people are missing again, the area is completely closed off. I got permission from Cy to search the pond. He informed me that no one is looking in that area anymore, as the search has moved much farther out into the forest. There shouldn't be anyone around to interrupt or question me. He told me to call if I found anything at all. The townspeople are basically on the verge of a riot, and the police don't know how much longer they can keep the peace. He also told me about some items that could be used as evidence to keep an eye out for in case I didn't find the actual bodies. The couple had a set of silver jewelry. They apparently always wore them. The man had a watch, and the woman had a bracelet. I obviously hoped to find more than just some jewelry if they were down there, but it was still good to know. I pulled into the small dirt parking lot and turned off my truck. From here, it's another 10 minutes to get to the pond on foot. As I expected, no one appeared to be around. I pulled my scuba gear out of the bed of the truck and humped it down the path until I saw the clearing and the pond came into view. It wasn't even a particularly wide pond, but it was surprisingly deep, up to 60 feet in the middle. I could already tell the water was incredibly murky, just like how I remembered it. I set my gear next to the remnants of an old dock and thought about the slasher. I probably should have brought someone with me to watch my back while I'm submerged, but I didn't want to involve anybody else in this grim affair. I figured too, even if he was out there, the odds he would attack me in broad daylight seemed incredibly slim. I had my gun in the glove box of my truck, which did at least make me feel a bit better. I got my gear on and sat on the edge of the dock with my legs dangling in the water. I glanced around the clearing to see if I could spot anything in the thick forest, but I didn't notice any movement. I turned my attention back to the water, and even a few feet away, I could only see a couple inches under the surface. Although the pond isn't super wide like I said, the banks dropped off pretty quickly, and even on the sides it went from about a foot deep to 10 in just a couple of steps. The dark water actually encouraged me a bit. I fully believed whatever search the diver had done couldn't have been enough. A day and a half isn't sufficient with this pond. I had every intention of searching for an hour today, just to feel it out, and then around 4 hours every day after, until I either turned up something or was 100% sure the bodies were not down there. I glanced around the woods one last time, and then took a deep breath before I plunged myself into the cool water. I sank down quickly and just floated a few feet under for a moment, until I got a small amount of visibility. It still wasn't much. I knew well enough it wasn't going to get any better though. I began to swim and survey around the sides of the pond. I was only about 2 feet under, and my plan was to do the top of the perimeter today, and then over the next few days go deeper. Basically, make a big circle, and then slowly bring the circle tighter and tighter until I had searched the entire body of water. I shivered some, remembering the body in the middle, as the image still appears in my restless brain quite often. Like I said, I've recovered bodies before, but none of them have been mutilated like that poor man. I shook the image out of my head and continued scanning what was visible. I kept my right hand on a steep bank and slowly made some progress around the pond. I only spotted small fish and what looked like some holes in the bank that I planned to check out once I had finished with the rest of the pond. The holes on the side of ponds and rivers were really common here and usually contained fish, crawfish, or turtles. After 50 minutes, I saw that I was low on air. My tank held just under an hour's worth. The most excitement I had in that time period was seeing a large snapping turtle swimming above me. I climbed out of the cloudy water back onto the dock and checked my surroundings. There was no one around still, which I expected. I figured I had probably searched under 5% of the pond, and I knew this wasn't going to be over quickly. The bodies could easily still be down there. I wasn't even close to making any kind of conclusion yet. I packed up my gear and got back in my truck, beginning a slow drive home. Quite frankly, I just wanted to go back so I could get my search over with and my conscience cleared. I didn't know if I wanted to find the bodies or not. I was positive that I had to know for sure one way or another. The families needed closure if they were in the pond. It scared me more to think that they were down there, but if I didn't find them, no one would ever know. They would just decompose, forgotten by the world, and not able to gain any peace in death. I couldn't live with myself if I let that happen. I woke up early the next morning and made the drive to that excuse for a parking lot. I arrived back at the dock hauling 2 of my 4 tanks, and then returned to my truck for the last 2. I slowly got my gear back on and let out a deep sigh as I scanned the tree line, but no sign of movement. I reluctantly turned my gaze down to the water and imagined what horrors the day could bring. I lowered myself in and once again began scanning the sides, but this time a bit deeper. I still wasn't quite at the bottom, but I could occasionally see it through the brown water. Once again, I didn't see much except for some fish and a few more holes in the bank. I was going to check out 7 of the bigger holes I had seen that could maybe fit a body. I just wanted to wait until I had looked everywhere else. The thought of squeezing myself headfirst into those openings terrified me, and on some level, I hoped I'd find the bodies before having to do that. I felt bad thinking such an awful thing, but I still did either way. I finished my search for the second day and figured I'd now covered about 15% of the whole pond. It was slow moving. I had come up to replace my tanks 3 times, I was at least sure the areas I had checked were empty. I was exhausted too. I was ready to go home and take it easy until tomorrow. I packed up my gear and was about to head down the path when something on the other side of the water caught my eye. It took me a second to register what it was, and to my surprise, it was a man. He was just standing in the tree line staring at me, and I immediately felt on edge. Before I could yell anything to him, he turned around and walked back into the forest. I hurried down the path and relaxed some once I was inside my truck. I left 2 of my tanks behind as I just wanted to get out of there as quickly as possible. I figured the man was probably just some hiker, but the chance it could be the slasher really disturbed me. It was crazy to think that I may have just seen him, and I debated calling the police. But I reminded myself that I had no actual reason to believe it was him other than the fact he was near the pond. For all I knew, it could have even been the missing man. I thought for a few minutes in my truck about whether I should go after him, call the police, or just wait. I opted to wait until I was done searching the pond. If I called the police, it would cause even more panic and would likely be for nothing. If I went after him, there were countless scenarios that could occur. I figured too, why would the missing man just be hanging out in the forest? So I assumed it wasn't him at least. The smartest option seemed to be to rule out the pond, and if I saw the man again, then it would be time to inform the police. I turned on my truck and drove away feeling conflicted and uneasy. I arrived back home and napped for the rest of the day. I went to bed early and woke up as soon as the sun rose and prepared myself for the longest day yet. I had covered less than 1/6 of the pond using 5 total tanks and decided to bring another 5 just for today alone. 4 tanks a day was usually my limit, but I wanted this to be done with. My goal was to get over a quarter of the pond searched total. I pulled into the parking lot much more wary of the potential that the slasher was actually out there. I kept my eyes on the woods as I walked to the clearing and set down 2 of my 5 tanks. I didn't feel like going back for the rest until I needed them, so I left the other 3 in my truck. My arms were so sore from the past 2 days, and scuba tanks are much heavier than most people realize. The 2 empty ones from yesterday were still where I left them, which put me at ease a bit. I scanned the trees around the pond more intently, but thankfully I didn't notice anything. I got all my gear on and took my traditional deep sigh before I lowered myself into the water. It felt murkier than usual, but I think I was just nervous. I was going to scan the bottom around the sides, and then if I had time begin to explore the middle some. At the top it was easy to rule out spots, but the deeper I went the search became slower and much more difficult. I gradually pushed my way through the water, and once again I only saw some fish. After 40 minutes, when my air was about 2/3 of the way empty, I spotted a large log that was resting on the bottom against the side. I examined the log for a few minutes but didn't find anything of note. It had some crawfish inside, but that was about it. I began to move on, but I quickly stopped when I noticed something off to the left. It was another hole. I had seen a lot, but none were nearly as big as this one. It was about a foot from the very bottom, and absolutely huge. 2 grown men would have been able to swim inside at the same time, and I hesitated for a moment, marveling at its sheer size. If someone was going to hide some bodies and had the means of staying underwater for a long time, this would be the perfect spot. I just slowly paddled in place, staring at the pitch-black opening to the tongue. I wanted nothing more than to move on and leave it alone, but I couldn't. I approached the opening, and with yet another deep sigh, pushed my way inside. I turned my flashlight on as I could see next to nothing without it. In the main part of the pond, I didn't use it much. It just kind of made my view choppy. I only occasionally flipped it on in certain sections. However, this was a whole different story. Without it, I would have been in total darkness. I was a bit in awe of how much room there was as I moved farther in. I had about a foot of space below me, and almost 2 above. I had never noticed this tunnel before. I have no idea why it was so big. I assumed it could have connected to a cave, and the entrance to the pond opened up at some point. We had a lot of caves around here, and it wouldn't surprise me at all if one was attached to the pond. I was about 15 feet in before I began to be able to make out the back wall. It was comprised of a large pile of rocks and seemed to confirm it did lead into a cave. But the ceiling had collapsed at some point, blocking the rest of the tunnel. I examined the floor for a few minutes, but I only saw mud and a thick layer of leaves and rocks. I was about to turn around with a huge sense of relief, but something reflected off my flashlight in the far back corner that I had missed on my first glance. I swam over and realized it was what appeared to be a silver bracelet. My blood ran cold. It looked just like the one Sai had described. I picked it up and pushed around some of the rocks and leaves next to where it sat. I scanned the area more carefully, my flashlight shaking in my hand. To my horror, what looked like a human skull came into view. I felt the bracelet slip out of my numb, trembling hand. It was in fact a human skull broken into 3 pieces, as well as what appeared to be a vertebrae. I was convinced it had to be the remains of the woman, and the other 2 were probably here as well. I was almost out of air, so I didn't have any more time to look. This was enough for the police to get involved, though. They could bring in more divers and scour the whole tunnel. I felt disgusted, but also a bit relieved. I had solved the mystery, and the families could have some closure at least. My thoughts were broken by the sudden strange feeling that someone was behind me. I could just sense a presence, so I slowly turned around and raised my flashlight. What I saw will never leave my nightmares. It wasn't a human being, certainly not the slasher. What it actually was is still hard for my mind to accept as real. I stared in horror, locking eyes with the biggest catfish I've ever seen. It was about 10 feet away, and I could only make out some of its face, but it blocked most of the tunnel and had eyes the size of hockey pucks. Advertisements. I froze in terror, waiting for the behemoth to do something, but it just floated there looking at me. I checked my dive watch. I was down to under 5 minutes of air, and I began to really panic. I was cornered in a tunnel by what I estimated to be at minimum an 8-foot catfish. I knew catfish could get big. I had even seen 2 4-footers, but nothing close to this. I didn't know what to do, but adrenaline began to take over. I couldn't just stay here and wait. I didn't have time. It wasn't moving, and if I didn't, I was going to drown. I gathered my courage and pushed myself in its direction. It still didn't budge, not until we were eye to eye. Just then, it snapped to life and lunged at my arm. I let out a muffled scream into my regulator as it clamped down, and we rolled around for a moment. It swallowed my flashlight in the process, and I could no longer see the monster that had half my left arm in its enormous mouth. I couldn't believe how strong it was. I couldn't do anything to get it off. It pushed its way past me, pressing me against the wall, and then spinning me around. I slammed off the walls, ceiling, and floor over and over in the dark. I felt my ribs crack and my left arm snap at the elbow. It seemed like it was dragging me back to the end of the tunnel, to total darkness and death. On top of that, my worst possible fear as a diver came true. My tank got caught on the ceiling and was ripped off my back. I was now purely on a breath hold and in immense pain. My adrenaline that was already high entered a whole new gear. I reached onto the ground with my good arm, trying to grab anything I could use as a weapon. My fingers dragged through mud and decaying leaves before I felt what I knew to be a bone that was likely a human femur. I didn't even hesitate to grab it. My lungs burned intensely. I jabbed at the fish's face as hard as I could muster. I eventually felt it release my arm and make a croaking sound. I assumed I had caught its large eyes and frantically pushed my way back towards the dim light of the entrance. I swam desperately down the tunnel, waiting for the catfish to grab my leg and pull me back into its lair. I pushed with everything I had, using all the strength that remained in my body. My left arm just hung uselessly at my side, and I couldn't tell if my ribs or lungs hurt worse. I managed to escape into the main pond and lunged my way towards the sky that grew brighter. My chest burned and my head pounded. I could feel movement behind me too. I reached the surface just as my lungs felt like they were going to explode. I sucked in air as I splashed over to the shore, and tried to climb out shaking with terror. I was about 20 feet to the right of the dock, but I had to get out as soon as possible. The bank was too steep though, and I couldn't pull myself up with just my right arm. I clawed against the soft mud hopelessly, expecting to feel my legs pulled out from beneath me at any moment. Just then, a man appeared and grabbed both of my arms, pulling me onto the bank. I screamed as intense pain shot down my left arm. I made sure both my legs were out before I glanced back, and from a few inches below, I could just barely make out the catfish looking at me. It had followed me up to the surface, and if I had been in the water any longer, it would have gotten me. I could see its blood floating above its unnervingly large eyes. It seemed to stare at me for a few moments, before it slowly faded away back into the depths. I scrambled up to my feet and stumbled about 10 feet away from the pond, before I allowed myself to fall onto my back, taking the deepest breaths of my life. The man walked over with a concerned look on his face. "Are you all right? What are you doing in the pond?" I relaxed some and focused my attention on the kind-looking older man. I was still on edge and ready to defend myself if need be. It was the same guy from yesterday. I was wary, but since he pulled me out of the water, I figured he probably wasn't planning on hurting me. I was looking for the missing people who are here. I got permission from the police to be here. "Why are you here?" I demanded sternly. "I live on the other side of the pond, man. About 2 miles away through those trees. I know the pond's closed off, that's why I was watching. I was trying to figure out what we were doing." I fully relaxed once he said that. I guess he still could have been the slasher, but at that moment I didn't even care. "If you have a phone, you need to call the police right now. I found the bodies of the missing people." I paused for a moment. "And what's responsible?" The whole police force turned up to the pond. Even officers from the next county over came too. They got the best fishermen in town to try and pull the catfish out. After 3 days, they finally were able to after a 2-hour-long battle. It took 5 men to get it onto shore. It was by far the biggest blue catfish ever recorded. It was almost 9 feet long and weighed 274 pounds. For scale, the previous record in Arkansas was 116 pounds. It had abnormally large eyes for a catfish, and its coloration was unusual as well. People weren't even totally sure it was actually a blue cat. There just aren't any other species that live here, or all of America for that matter, that made any more sense. Even more disturbing, the remains of all 3 of the missing people were found in its stomach. To make matters worse, there were actually other human remains too. The police are trying to identify who they are, but they haven't had any luck yet. It does seem at least they aren't from our town. No one knows for sure if the fish pulled the deceased down while swimming or if they fell in. But if nothing else, our town's missing people are accounted for. I just hope they find out who the others are soon. Their families deserve some peace too. 4 of my ribs and left arm were broken, not to mention torn ligaments in my elbow and a concussion. I'm still recovering from the injuries, but I don't even care. I'm just happy to be alive. The guy who pulled me out really does live near the pond, and I'm thankful he was around to help me. I got a chance to talk to him while we were waiting for the police to show up. He seemed like a really nice guy. He apparently builds houses for a living, and has actually only lived here for about 5 years. He joked some that after all the chaos of the past few years, he may have to move, and I can't say I'd blame him if he does. The panic in town began to die down once the bodies were found. The decision was also made to close the pond off permanently. I don't think they even really needed to do it. No one wants to go near that place. Part of me wonders if the slasher is still out there. Maybe he killed those people and threw them in the water. People seem to ignore that aspect as everyone was quick to solely blame the fish. The police are still investigating the area, so I try not to worry about it too much. Besides, if not thinking about it makes folks feel better, then who am I to say anything about it? The catfish actually ended up being fried and was offered to anyone that wanted a plate. I had no interest in that myself. The thought of eating a fish that had consumed human beings absolutely disgusts me. I think some people viewed it as justice, like since it ate some of us, we're going to eat it. I guess that made sense. It didn't change how I feel about it though. I just wish I could get its face out of my head. Even almost a month later, I see the fish in my unsettling dreams every night. I wake up choking on imaginary water with the overwhelmed feeling of being stuck in that tunnel with human bones surrounding me. I think on some level I'll always be trapped in the monster's lair with those poor souls. I had always loved the night sky, be it for the twinkling light of the stars, the clever smile of the crescent moon, or that every night my mother would tell me stories as we gazed upon them together. She would bundle me up in my favorite blue blanket only to hold me hostage, smothering me with kisses and tickling my stomach until I nearly cried tears of laughter. We would sit together for what felt like hours as she spun her tales, retold stories she had been told by her own mother. Even in old age, she uses the same unserious voices she had used on those nights so long ago. It was on a night just like those nights before that my mother had spoken of wishing stars. With her arms stretched towards the sky, she pointed to the plethora of stars, explaining that there were few that watched us from the vast darkness of the night, watching and listening for children pure of heart. She said that if you listened closely, you could hear them giggling at one another as we dream of our innermost desires and fantasies. It was then that we saw it. Only for a brief moment did it leave its trail of starlight, but long enough that I was able to squeeze my eyes tightly shut and make my wish spooky narrative audiobooks. I wish for a friend. After we had finished our nightly procrastination, our stories concluded and our laughter subsided. She lifted me up in one swift swoop at which I giggled and melted into her embrace. Just before my body met with the bed, she would gently drop me onto the mattress, toppling over me, claiming I was so much more comfortable than any mattress she had used. Dragging out the bowel as I attempted to shove her off of me, I groaned. "Moon, you have your own bed, not me." She chuckled as she brought her face to my own, first to rub her nose to mine, only to kiss my forehead as she tucked me in. Before I could even think to run it away, she gave me that look. "Are you really going to wipe away my love for you?" I simply shook my head as I covered the lower half of my face with the blanket to hide my smile. "I love you," I whispered through the fabric. Leaning against the frame of my door, she returned the smile I tried so hard to hide. "I love you most." My eyelids were so heavy, I swear I had already fallen asleep before she had turned off the lights and shut the door. My eyes fluttered open, my eyelids still heavy. I hadn't been asleep very long. My stomach churned as the same sound that had woken me resumed. A low, uncanny whispering followed by the prolonged tapping of glass. Tap, tap, tap. My body went stiff as the final tap had become a deafening sound that I could only describe as similar to nails on a chalkboard. I'm surprised I had made it out of my bed without my legs giving out. My body trembled with every step. The whispering grew louder as I hesitantly shifted towards the windowsill. My palms had felt clammy as they gripped onto the thick fabric of my curtains. A light shone through each crease. Every entrance it could seep through it had done so. My heart nearly left my chest. It had been beating so harshly as the coldness of the air nipped at my skin. It hadn't been so cold earlier, had it? My mind raced with questions, my breath rigid and my mouth dry. As if to wake me once more, a single tap echoed against the walls of my bedroom. Why did I open the curtains? Why hadn't I simply fallen back to sleep when I had first woken up? Questions I ponder even now. The curiosity of a child is not so easily tainted, not even when met with an unsettling fear of the unknown. Swallowing that very fear, I had nearly taken down the curtains as I ripped them open. Unprepared for what I may have found, but so eager, so determined to vanquish whatever may be waiting for me. There, standing in the moonlight, was a creature unlike anything I had ever seen. Its skin was void of color, an empty blackness that blended into the darkness of the night, sickly thin and sleek beneath the light. Each and every part of its body seemed disproportionate and disfigured, from its neck to its spindly limbs that seemed to stretch forever. But the most terrifying part was its face, or rather, where its face should have been. What had been instead was unmistakably a star, though not like any star I had seen while Mother told her stories. No, this star was grim and grotesque. Each edge was uneven and sharp. Its light felt sinister as it gave off an unsettling cold. What would be its face consisted of two unblinking eyes, a sharp pointed nose, and a perverse smile that had stretched to be unnaturally wide, almost as if splitting the star-like head into two. Its lips were thin and cracked, revealing uneven and jagged teeth. My lips parted as if to scream, but no sound came out. My body betrayed me as it fell to the once comforting carpet of my floor. Each fiber had felt like needles to the touch against my near-frozen skin. Oh, how I wanted to look away, to scream and to cry, and yet all I could do was look. I had never known a smile that could invoke such raw terror as this, nor eyes so eerie. The creature moved closer, its limbs bending and twisting in unnatural ways. I watched, unmoving, as the darkness rippled around its arm that had reached for the window, teasingly dragging its fingertips along the pane before its needle-like claws had wedged it open. "Come, play with me," it whispered like the rustling of leaves. I felt all the warmth leave my body as it crept closer. I shook my head, dragging my body away from the window, yet the creature did not stop. My voice had yet to return, caught in the back of my throat. The hairs of my arms stood tall as goosebumps ran along my skin. It had climbed through the window, its body and limbs stretching and contorting to fit through and into such a small space. Its face shone brighter to fill the darkness of the room. "Don't be afraid, little one." The stinging chill of its presence settled, and its smile seemingly softened. "You wished for a friend, did you not?" I nodded as tears began to stream down my face. This wasn't what I had asked for. I wished for a friend, not a monster. The creature lifted a single claw to my cheek, wiping away my tears whilst staring down upon me with that wicked smile, stretching its neck over my fear-stricken body. I felt myself being effortlessly lifted. It placed me back in bed, petting my hair with that very same claw before retreating to the foot of my bed. "Do not fret. Friends do not make friends cry. And we shall be friends for a very long time." That night I had closed my eyes, hoping for it all to be but a dream. A horrible dream, but each and every night since. I felt its gaze, its very presence as its smile widened. Never once did it speak, but it watched as I slept, as I dreamt and grew. It would stare as I grew distant from my mother, who had once told me stories that her mother had once told her. Never again would I wish upon a star, for the friend I've been given reminds me of what happens when I do. It was an hour before Edgar's alarm was set to go off when a series of rapid thumps on the roof jolted him awake. He shot up from the small, hard bed, eyes shooting around the old trailer home as the bombardment continued, like the contents of a butcher's shop had been dropped on this lakeside retreat. By the time he had thrown off the dusty covers and gotten his feet on the cold floor, the barrage had stopped, leaving him in total silence save for his own breath. Then came another sound. It cut through the stillness, reminding him of the noise hot air balloons make when the fire is used to send them higher. It was there for a moment, then gone. He gave himself a few seconds to calm down before finding his clothes from yesterday and hauling them off, plus a muddy pair of boots at the door. He strung his hunting knife by the sheath through his belt as well, just in case. The dim light from outside barely lit up the windows past the worn curtains, but it was enough for him to tell that fog straddled the entire landscape just past the trailer. He grabbed the battery-powered lantern he had brought with him, even if it wouldn't help much. Still, holding it, as well as having his knife nearby, made his hands shake a little less. He opened the front door, stepping out onto the ramshackle, half-rotted front porch of the lake house. It was a steep 1-minute walk away down a gravel path to the small lake, formed from a dammed valley, and stocked with fish to try and bring in some development to this portion of Missouri. But all it had managed was a trailer park, a distance away around the lake, and a few old places like the one he and his extended family shared. He had been looking forward to unplugging for a few days of alone time, but apparently the weather had other plans. He groaned, his anxiety fading as he rubbed his temples. Stupid Missouri weather. Whatever had happened, the lake house had better not have been damaged. His carpentry skills were about on par with the funds he had to get someone out here to fix this crumbling place. But it was as soon as his first step off the covered front porch that he found the issue at hand was something else entirely. Plopped right on the front step was a large gelatinous thing, some sort of gray, squishy orb, almost like a deflated oblong balloon. He grabbed a walking stick from the porch and poked the blob, moving it off the step with a meaty thud. He stepped off, spotting more of the things even as the fog closed in around him. He walked around the perimeter of the house, checking and seeing no damage. Just more of those blobs littering the landscape and rolling off the roof, each one barely the length of his hand. Yet they were everywhere. What on earth could these things be? He poked another, shoving the stick further in. Yet the increased pressure didn't break or rip the blob. It gave inward. He sighed. He had his cell phone, but there was no signal on this side of the lake, and he couldn't take his car around with how thick this soup was. He had a long walk ahead of him. He moved toward the road, the lake house and tree line disappearing into the fog. No noise cut through the air save for his own footsteps. What had happened to the animals? Even with him present, the forest wildlife would make their presence known. Birds chirping, squirrels scurrying across the trees, deer shuffling through the undergrowth. Instead, there was nothing but silence. He found his reason why when he started down the gravel road that circled the lake. Right in the center of the road, just past the lake house's mailbox, was a deer lying on the gravel like it had been hit by a car. It lay still, but he could see its eyes were open, lids pulled back as if encountering him was a nightmare beyond the doe's capacity to imagine. It twitched and convulsed, and as he got closer, he saw that one of those blobs lay on its back, clinging to it like a tumor. He circled around and poked at the blob, but it kept its grip on the deer. The tremble made its way back into his hands, and he found himself wishing he had a gun as well as his knife. His family had been coming out to this lake for decades, and this had never happened before. Hell, this fog had never happened. The fog had always been something in the hills south of it, rolling slopes of forests that even hunters didn't bother with, as they never seemed to have any good luck. Things must have changed with all that new construction being done in the nearby town. Hadn't they altered a river or something for one of their projects? Either way, he had to keep going. The silence clung to him as much as the fog did, and for a moment he felt like he was caught in the clutches of some gigantic amoeba, a living being made of water that sought to pull him in further until it dissolved him down to the ground. His grip tightened on both the lantern and the walking stick as he lifted his feet, each newly encountered blob like a gray, translucent landmine. He smacked them off to the side when he could, clearing a path, but many others he dared not touch. The deer had just been the first. More animals littered the road. Unfortunate critters hit in this early morning by an unwanted surprise from the sky. Turkeys, a fox, squirrels everywhere, more deer, even the coyote he had been hearing all last night. All of them maimed and laid flat by these things. He continued his route around the lake, part of him wondering just how many had made their way down to the water, floating across it in clumps. The smell of ozone clung to everything. He wrapped a strip of cloth around his face to try and help him breathe, and by then it was just a few minutes before he saw another house. An A-frame cabin, a blue tarp just visible flapping on the roof, and an assortment of broken-down cars littering the front yard. The blobs covered everything, seeming a bit more inflated than the ones he had encountered earlier. They were almost taking on a football shape, a tapered point on one end, and the other side flat, and the sharp ozone scent seemed to be emanating from them. Unlike earlier, not a single animal lay in the forest or grass around him. He made his way up to the front door and knocked. "Hey," he called out, almost shocked by how loud his voice was in the dead air. "Name's Edgar. I'm staying at the house down the road. You got a phone? Didn't this guy live here full time? He had to have a landline or something. Maybe even a walkie-talkie that could reach the trailer park. We really gotta make some calls. He reached for the door and found it unlocked, squeaking open. The wooden walls of the cabin were adorned with various taxidermy animals and an array of antlers on plaques, plus pinned-up pictures of the resident holding up various fish caught in the lake. The floor was bare wood, the entire place feeling like it was still being worked on despite standing there for years. He moved through the hall, scoping out each Spartan room and finding no one. "Hello," he called out again. "Really sorry for barging in like this. Anyone home?" Nothing. He made his way to the other side of the A-frame. He took the stairs before him, emerging into an open attic space that served as a bedroom. Across from him, he could see the blue tarp, forced inward by the rain of the gray blobs that had come down on it. It hung like a curtain across from him, fog spilling inside from the hole in the ceiling that had gone too long without being repaired. To the side near him was an open gun cabinet, and just inside he could see a hunting rifle. He didn't know the make or model, but it was there. A box of cartridges sat on a shelf by it in the case. He moved in, grabbing the rifle and slinging its sash over his shoulder. No one was here, and if he managed to get through this in one piece, he'd return it with a few dollars to cover any ammo he used. His body relaxed some as he felt the stock in his hands. The tarp rattled. Edgar spun around, tensing back up when he saw the shape of a person forming in the tarp. "Hey," he called out. "So sorry about this. I'll give it back." He moved the rifle away from him, pointing the muzzle down at the floor. "You really need to know what's going on out there." No response. The figure shuffled, jerking around like a marionette. It stumbled around the tarp with all the grace of a local redneck after happy hour in his favorite bar. It lurched free of the tarp, and soon Edgar could see the man, dressed in torn jeans with a soiled white tank top. Each muscle in him looked tensed, taut like wires supporting a bridge. His eyes and mouth pulled back from his face in a frozen look of surprise. And adorning him like a colossal leech was one of those gray blobs, latched around the side of his neck. Long gray tentacles spread away from the football-shaped sack, wrapping down the man's torso to his feet, across his arms to his hands and up his face, as if the thing was using the tendrils to make him look at something he wanted to shy away from. What the actual? Edgar lost the words, trembling hands grabbing the box of cartridges before shoving them in a pocket and trying to open the chamber of the bolt-action rifle. "Please stay back. You just stay right there. I'll be right back with your gun and an ambulance." The man regarded him, or perhaps it was more accurate to say the blob regarded him. It made him lurch forward, and as it got closer, Edgar could see it had swollen up more, with little fins starting to form on its side. "The Mist Queen is boarding this area," said the man, a tentacle wrapped tight around his throat. The voice was dead, empty, spoken without any rhythm or meter. "Are you ready to board?" "Mist Queen. Board. What?" Edgar racked his mind at what he was hearing. "Are you ready to board?" the man asked again. He looked at him. "You aren't ready." This man wasn't, either. "This will be quick." The man's hand shot down, grabbing one of the loose blobs and palming it like a baseball. As he held it, the tentacles shot out of its flat bottom like a spike trap, hanging in the air for a second before going limp. "You will be ready for boarding." The man threw the blob at Edgar, who just managed to duck to the side as it flailed past him. Its tentacles went every way, thrashing about in a desperate attempt to grab him, all while the stench of ozone grew. The blob hit the wall with a thud, but instead of falling, it floated down, tentacles drooping to the floor. Edgar darted down the stairs as fast as he could, and soon he could hear the puppet of a man charging after him. He hit the ground floor and made for the outside. As the man threw himself down the stairs, the controlling parasite not heeding the damage it was doing to its host. As jerking as its motions were, it moved so quickly. Edgar slung the rifle again, freeing his hand to properly grab his walking stick. He dropped the lantern and readied his weapon as the man shot upright, as if lifted by strings. The man charged at him, the blob from before now held in his hand. Edgar lanced ahead, getting the man in the chest with enough force to knock him down with a loud crack. But Edgar fell back as well from the momentum. He caught himself, eyeing the man ahead. His chest had caved in, but still the man launched himself back onto his feet. The parasite focused on its goal, even as the man surely had to be mortally wounded. "You will be ready to board the Mist Queen," said the man in that same cold, empty voice, as if uttered by a robot. "Hell with this," said Edgar, dropping the stick and readying the hunting rifle. He managed to force a cartridge into the chamber and locked it tight, raising the barrel at his opponent. He did everything he could to keep his hands from shaking the barrel. Trying to replicate the breathing exercises his uncle had taught him when showing him how to use a gun. The man shot forward, and Edgar fired. Rather than hit him straight on, his shaking had sent the bullet into the pulsating sac on his neck. The sac exploded in a fiery ball, setting part of the A-frame alight and sending the man's head flying as his decapitated body fell to the floor, the tentacles covering him falling off. Edgar's ears rang as he stumbled back, doing everything he could to calm down and get out of the burning house, having just enough thought to grab the lantern as he did. Somehow him killing a man wasn't even close to his main thought as he stumbled back out into the fog, stopping at a rusted truck to catch himself. What on earth had he just seen? This couldn't be real. Was that some sort of alien? Had an alien ship come to this lake and dropped some sort of bioweapon on them so it could abduct them all with ease? He could see more of the blobs around him, scattered like party balloons, but inflating more and more. They lay about doing nothing, but if he had touched one of them, he shuddered. He tied the lantern to his belt, thankful he had thought to grab that. The walking stick was gone. Left in the house, the fire continued to consume. He wasn't about to reclaim it, and the rifle took priority. He would need it. He heard more shuffling off in the woods, and now he knew why he had not seen animals around here. The aliens must have gone to his house last, traveling around the lake dropping their puppeteer parasites. The Mist Queen. The name stuck in his mind. He recalled a story his uncle had told him about a zeppelin, a majestic sight that had once flown across the Midwest. One of its crew had gone mad while the Mist Queen had been cruising over these hills, causing it to crash into one of the lakes further south. And since then, the ghost of this zeppelin haunted the forest, carried by the fog as it could no longer float on the air past it. Were these parasites the twisted form of its crew, seeking more passengers to carry to the afterlife? More shuffling, and just off in the fog he could see forms moving in the undergrowth that encroached on the gravel road. He saw a buck, tentacles twisting their way up its antlers. He loaded another cartridge, trying to spot where the parasite was on the animal. Ozone plagued the air. He kept moving as he heard the deer lurch forward, falling over its own limbs with even less grace than the man had been piloting. He picked up his pace, doing all he could to avoid the parasites that had yet to catch a host. Another animal stumbled out of the woods, but he kept going. He did a double take when he saw a squirrel floating through the air, carried by a much larger swollen parasite like a balloon. This one's side fins had fully formed, complete with two on the front and back. A cavity lay between them, and a circular bulge had manifested on the front of the thing's face. Edgar would swear the parasite was pointing that bulge at him. At last he could see the rows of mobile homes up ahead, encased in a shabby wooden privacy fence. The Oak Village trailer park. He saw more small animals floating upward, disappearing into the fog, and paying him no mind. Squirrels, rabbits, birds, even a fox and bobcat, their own parasites inflating more to support their climb up the thick air. A deer stumbled out of the woods, its parasite the size of a beach ball and still swelling. The deer looked to be shriveling up, desiccating. No time. He charged up the road, finally spotting the office for the trailer park. He barged his way inside and slammed the door shut behind him. He pushed himself against it, panting as he slid down to the floor. No lights were on inside the office, as empty and dead as the rest of the world we now lived in. Who knew how far this fog went, created by the Mist Queen so it could take on passengers, carried this far north by the changes to the landscape affecting where its vapors could travel. He checked the chamber of his rifle again. He had a handful of cartridges left, his lantern and his hunting knife for whatever good that would serve him. Maybe it would leave after taking enough of the wildlife, and whatever poor souls that had touched one of its crew. Or perhaps they would all be ready to board. "Hey," said a voice, followed by the cocking of a gun. Edgar looked up to see a middle-aged, frumpy, bald man pointing a pistol at him before lowering it. "You ain't one of those freaks. Sorry about that." "It's okay," said Edgar. "Been a long morning." He pulled himself up. "Edgar." "Warren," said the man. "Where on earth you come from, boy?" "Down the road," said Edgar. "Got any idea what's going on?" "No more than you do. I'd wager," he said. He moved over to the front desk and grabbed a water bottle, which he tossed to Edgar. "Those damn blob things plastered my entire park before the sun was up. Tried to clear them off before the dimwits renting my lot started messing with them when I realized something was off. I'm sure you've seen what these things do." Edgar nodded. "So you've been hiding in here," he said. "When's help coming?" Warren shook his head. "Don't know what these things are, but they're damn smart." One of them, controlling this father and his kids, dug up the line those internet people had just installed. "Cell phones ain't working either. Whatever's doing this has us cut off. The Mist Queen. I heard one of them saying that before she threw one of those blobs at another woman here." Warren shuddered. "I don't know where they are right now. Last I saw, they were trying to break into a house 2 lots over. 2 idiots I've been trying to evict for a while, because they keep shooting off these massive fireworks after midnight." "That might be just what we need," said Edgar. "I shot one of those parasites and it exploded." Warren raised a hand to his chin, contemplating this. "Better we hide. Who knows where they are?" A window shattered somewhere in the back of the office. They both raised their guns, Edgar flicking off the safety as he took in the form shuffling out of the background. A man, his body shriveling even as the parasite on his side swelled, contorting and breaking his spine to accommodate itself. "The Mist Queen is boarding this area," he croaked out, the dead voice hoarse. "Are you ready to be boarded?" In his hands he held 2 more of the parasites, tentacles ready. "Why'd it have to be you, Gary?" growled Warren. "Damn Mist Queen's taking over my favorite tenants." He shot Gary's parasite without hesitation, the gray blob erupting into fire and blasting its victim to bits. "Guess we're trying for that house, kid." They burst out of the burning office, Edgar's ears still ringing. What on earth was in those things that made them explode? It had to be tied to the ozone he smelled. Why the victims were shriveling up as the parasites grew bigger. The fog closed in on them, but even through it they could see people stumbling their way. Their parasites had grown almost as large as their bodies, inflating so much their victims seemed to almost float across the ground, each gentle step carrying them with ease. Edgar gulped and fired, taking out another and earning another blazing explosion that obliterated the poor host. Still the parasites sent their debilitated puppets forward, more of their ilk in hand, swollen football-shaped orbs taking control from all manner of places. They favored the head and shoulders, but he saw them clinging everywhere they could. One floated along while dragging its puppet by the foot. Many threw parasites at them, but they managed to dodge, Warren doing so by a hair. The flames made the others shy away, and soon a path was cleared for them to charge down the park's road toward the lot Warren had pointed out. Another mobile home, nearly indistinguishable from the rest. The door broken in and the previous tenants out on the front lawn, floating upward and making their way into the fog. Others still remained, blocking their way. Edgar and Warren held back from destroying these ones. If they did, they'd risk catching the home afire and lighting all the fireworks. More came in behind them, but these ones did not try to attack or throw their parasites like the others. They stared at the 2 of them, A line of desiccated men, women, and children at the complete mercy of their puppeteers, eyes almost begging them for help even as the tentacles pulled the lids back and worked their mouths and throats. The Mist Queen is boarding this area. They called out in unison, "Are you ready to board?" The actual crap is the Mist Queen, barked Warren, raising his gun. "I don't believe in ghosts, so you'd better have something good." The hosts stopped, jerking their heads to look at each other. "We are the Mist Queen," one said. "What?" Warren scratched his head. "The Mist Queen is no ghost," another said. "Each of us is the Mist Queen. All of us together, working as one, united to serve the whole, each designed to a unique purpose. We are to ready you to board. Others will board you. More will take care of you. And the rest shall carry the Mist Queen to the next place." They all stopped and jerked their heads upward. "The rest of us is here." Edgar felt his skin grow cold as he looked at the fog, still as obscure and opaque as before. Then he saw something move. Giant cords, tapering down from the sky, dozens of them. No, not cords, tentacles. Tentacles just like those on the parasites. Elegant yet covered in rows upon rows of barbs. Had he not been trying so hard to find them, they might have almost blended into the fog. The tentacles twisted upward, and the further he craned his neck, the more he could make out an obscure dark figure floating down. He heard the hot air balloon sound from before, and the shape moved ahead, the fog parting to reveal what now draped its tendrils across the trailer park. Its body matched that of its parasites, but yet was so much more. The thin, inflated form was lined and supported by a frame of something white like bone, containing its swollen body like a cage. Rows upon rows of pods lined the protruding bottom side. Above them, he could see the inner workings of the horror through the translucent hide, pulsating organs working to power the monstrosity. Bodies of the taken floated upward toward the pods, tentacles reaching and grabbing them before the pods opened sideways for their catch to be placed inside. The parasites relinquished their host and grabbed onto the outside of the pods, fusing with the flesh and wriggling their way back into the main body, returning to the center where rows of them hung like profane fruit. The pods closed once full, their prey now fully boarded and ready to be taken care of. He sawed at the tentacle, cutting it off and sending him back to the ground. He hit the debris-covered floor of the home, a whole new host of pain joining the tentacle that had loosened itself from his waist. He cried out again, his knife lost to the side. The Mist Queen still lay overhead, only a matter of time before it sent down another tentacle to board him. There it was, just within reach. The tube of fireworks, spared from destruction by the falling debris. He still had the lighter. He could see the wick sticking out as if beckoning to him. "You will still board," called out a parasite's host as it floated by, even as Edgar fought for his life. All parts of the Mist Queen still acted like he was just a small part of a normal day. He cried out in excruciation as he flicked the lighter on and set the wick ablaze. He pushed himself and rolled away, his body finally giving out from the countless wounds covering him, leaving him on his back. The fireworks went off a distance away, countless shots flying up into the sky and blanketing the Mist Queen in their multicolored glory. Blast after blast hit its underside, searing tentacles, blasting pods and charring the hanging parasites. He could almost see the banded eye widening as the firing sound emitted again, trying to carry the floating horror away from the constant bombardment. The firing sound was soon accompanied by an eruption that dwarfed all those emitted from the hosts, and Edgar just managed to see a fiery blaze erupt on one side of the Mist Queen, sending it off tilt and moving toward the ground as he descended into unconsciousness. Edgar awoke to find himself in a bed, most of his body wrapped up, and every part of him hurting like he had just been put through a trash compactor. He must be at the clinic in the town near the trailer park. A nurse entered the room and turned to him when he awoke. "Good to see you're awake," said the nurse. "You have a lot of questions right now, don't you? Just know you're safe for now, though I have someone who wants to talk to you." "Okay," said Edgar. He couldn't do anything else. He was trapped, but at least he still lived. The nurse nodded and left, soon replaced by a man in a suit. Edgar had only ever seen men like him in movies. "Hello, young man," he said. "You're quite lucky to be alive. After all, it's not every day a gas main explodes and takes out an entire trailer park, plus some of the surrounding area. Online movie streaming services. That's not..." Edgar stopped. It clicked. "I suppose I am." As if anyone would believe the truth. But surely the man across from him had to make sure Edgar didn't even try. Well, at least it won't happen again. "It's all over with, isn't it? We're cleaning up all the other remnants in the area," said the man. "We've picked up the mobile home park, the lake, and the burnt house nearby. That one yours?" "No, the one past it," said Edgar. "At least they're all gone, right?" "There were none dropped at the house past the burned one," said the man. He started, his calm expression giving way for just a second, then reached up to his ear. "I'll take my leave for now. Get the nurse to call someone to get you. You won't be going back to your house for a while." Before Edgar could say anything else, he darted out the door. Edgar lay in bed, skin growing clammy even as his exhaustion caught up with him again. He faded back into sleep, but not before he glanced out the window, and in the early misty morning, almost thought he could see a small, floating, translucent shape moving through the vapor.